Chapter 732. Jinwon was too quiet at the cocktail party tonight. Many people came to see her, because they heard that Mr. and Mrs. Mo would come in person. But apart from seeing Jinwon when they arrived, they didn't pay much attention to where she was. At this time, Jinwon was sitting on the sofa in the corner. Her back was sore and her legs were weak, so she didn't want to move. Mo Jingshan knew what state she was in, so he put his coat on her shoulders and asked her to sit there to rest. As a result, the others didn't see where Jinwon was, but when the people nearby saw her sitting there lazily, they just thought she was not feeling well or something, so they greeted her when they passed by. Jinwon also raised her hand politely to say hello, with a polite smile on her face. Jinwon didn't pay much attention until two young girls in the distance quietly looked toward her and whispered to each other. Jinwon didn't pay much attention to them, but she just turned to get a glass of red wine and went back to sit on the sofa. When she looked back, she saw that one of the girls in a pink evening dress was approaching Mo Jingshan with a blush. She didn't know what she was saying to Mo Jingshan, but it was not hard to see that she adored him. Jinwon glanced over there. There were many women who adored Mo Jingshan, so she was not surprised now. She saw that Mo Jingshan didn't even look at the girl, but was talking to a man next to him, looking indifferent, as if he didn't see the pink peacock-like girl next to him. After talking to the man next to him, he ended the conversation and walked away from her without a trace. It seemed that she was the daughter of a business partner in Los Angeles. Seeing that Mo Jingshan didn't even look at her, the girl was a little disappointed, but didn't dare to approach him again. She turned around and resentfully returned to the other girl. The two of them seemed to be discussing something, and their eyes kept glancing in Jinwon's direction. Then they suddenly approached her, thinking that Jinwon hadn't noticed them. When they came over, they seemed to approach her unintentionally. Then the two of them picked up the red wine on the long table beside Jinwon, chatted with each other while drinking, and then continued to approach her. When she saw that one of the girls was about to spill the red wine on her, Jinwon sat still and said lightly, "Even if you spill the red wine on me and force me to find a place to change my clothes, even if I'm not sitting here, Mr. Mo won't look at any woman except me. I advise you not to try your luck. Otherwise, even Mr. Mo won't let you off easily. After all, no matter how rich the Mo family is, this dress worth more than 1,000,000 yuan was spilled by the red wine." He has to give her an explanation. The girl who almost spilled the red wine on her stiffened and immediately steadied the glass. She glanced awkwardly at Jinwon. Jinwon didn't dare to spill the wine on her. She didn't dare to do so. However, Jinwon sat there indifferently, with a casual smile in her eyes, but her eyes were cold. She had no intention of forgiving them for their misdeeds, just because they were young. The two girls were indeed young, and not very scheming. They just wanted to talk to Mo Jingshan, but seeing that Mr. Mo was too cold, they thought it was inconvenient for him to communicate with other girls, because his wife was here. So they took the opportunity to send Mrs. Mo away, and see if Mo Jingshan would talk to them. However, to their surprise, the two girls looked at each other awkwardly, and put down the wine glasses. "Mrs. Mo, you're thinking too much. I didn't hold it steady just now. Fortunately, Mrs. Mo reminded me. Otherwise, I might have accidentally spilled it on you. I'm sorry." One of the girls turned to Jinwon and apologized awkwardly. Jinwon's expression remained unchanged. She was neither cold nor indifferent, nor did she put on a condescending air. She just looked back at them indifferently and said flatly, "I can understand the young lady's yearning for love, but in your eyes, Mr. Mo is already a married man who has been married for many years. I suggest you change the direction of your yearning. It's not a good thing to want to hook up with another man's husband at such a young age." The two girls immediately blushed. We didn't mean that. You'd better not." Jinwon gently curved her lips, but her smile did not reach her eyes. "There's nothing wrong with being simple, but under normal circumstances, I won't be polite to those who have such thoughts. After being married for so many years, I've seen all kinds of women. Some young girls who are too straightforward can be trampled to death like ants crossing the street. At such a young age, why do you want to make others unhappy and harm yourself and others at the same time?" The two girls looked a little embarrassed. However, this person was Mrs. Mo after all, so they didn't dare to quarrel or do anything else. And Mrs. Mo clearly saw through them, which was why she said such words. In this case, if they continued to argue, they would not be in the right and would definitely be at a disadvantage. The two girls did not dare to say anything more. They looked at each other, stuck out their tongues, and turned to leave quickly, not daring to stay any longer. Jinwon was not affected by this little episode at all. She still sat in the same place and took a sip of red wine from time to kill time. Less than 10 minutes later, Mo Jingshin came back and helped Jinwon up from the sofa. He whispered in her ear with a smile. "Are you still very tired?" The man's voice was very low and light, and only she could hear it. Jinwon glanced at him, accusing him with her eyes. Of course, he had tortured her so much before coming to the party. It would be strange if she had the strength now. Recently he had not stopped almost every night. It was as if he wanted to make up for the pain he had suffered in the past 3 years of abstinence. At this moment, there were people dancing at the party. Mo Jingshin held Jinwon's hand in the crowd and did not go over to join in the fun. He let go of her hand and turned to hold her waist, drawing her into his arms, and lowered his head to look at her. "I heard that Mrs. Mo said harsh words to someone today. If anyone dares to have any thoughts about Mr. Mo, you definitely won't be polite to them, right?" Chapter 733. Mo Jingshin was very satisfied with the news that came out of the two girls' mouths. Jinwon calmly looked at the people in the dance hall and said, "If I were standing here today as the head of MN Group, I might be able to avoid any disputes and protect my company's image. But now I'm Mrs. Mo. Some girls even want to step on my head. Do I look like I'm easy to bully?" How could Jinwon be easy to bully? She had never been easy to bully. But she did deal with things according to the situation and the people. Mo Jingshin smiled in satisfaction. His hand tightened around her waist. "With Mrs. Mo around, we can indeed avoid a lot of trouble." "Are those little girls who come because of your reputation trouble? I thought Mr. Mo actually likes them very much." Jinwon deliberately teased him. The man's palm stroked her waist, and his voice was so low and husky that only she could hear it. "Don't you know what I like, Mrs. Mo? And Jinwon." She immediately gave the man a reproachful look, but the man chuckled and lifted the coat on her back. "If you're tired, go back and rest early. Tonight is just a formality. You don't have to be here the whole time." Jinwon grunted in response, but she did not leave so thoughtlessly. After all, she was already late. If she left early, it would be inappropriate. She knew this in her heart. As the CEO of MN Group and the wife of the CEO of Shine Group, no matter how much Mo Jingshin spoiled her, she had to be responsible for her words and actions. She used to be the Mrs. Mo that Mo Jingshin doted on, but now, she was the Mrs. Mo that could stand side by side with him. Why is life so fortunate to be able to live with the person you love? The memories of two lives are related to you. Jinwon was 25 years old, and Mo Jingshin was 30 years old. A month later, shortly after Jinwon and Mo Jingshin's vacation began, she was called back to High City by Xia Tian to deal with the company's new project, mainly because Xia Tian's baby caught a cold. It was the first time the baby had a fever since she was born, which frightened Xia Tian, who was known as a strong woman in the business world. It was said that at 3 o'clock in the morning, Xia Tian was so anxious that she couldn't fall asleep. She rushed to the hospital overnight and refused to let go of the baby. The doctors in the hospital, on the other hand, had long been used to it. After arranging the fever patches, anti-inflammatory drugs, and so on, they said that it was normal for the baby to have a fever and didn't need to worry, and then left the consulting room. Every time Xia Tian mentioned this thrilling night, the colleagues in the company who had long been mothers would have a common topic. They all said that when their baby had a fever for the first time, they were all frightened. They all said that the baby had a fever and had a fever. But later, they became more experienced, and they were very calm even when the baby had a fever. Half a month after Jinwon returned to High City, she was oppressed by Xia Tian and her colleagues in the company. Every day, she was urged to have a baby. It had only been 2 months since she became clear-headed and recovered. It couldn't be that fast. Jinwan was not in a hurry at all. As time went by, Mo Jingshan's birthday came. Jinwan was actually a stubborn person. She didn't remember many festivals and anniversaries as clearly as other women. She thought about it carefully. It seemed that she hadn't specially celebrated Mo Jingshan's birthday for so many years. So a week before his birthday, she casually mentioned it to Xia Tian and Xiao Ba. But on the day of his birthday, she completely forgot about it. It wasn't until Xia Tian and Xiao Ba took her to the mall to buy things that she remembered it. But it was already the afternoon of the same day. She clearly remembered that when she got up in the morning, Mo Jingshan was the same as usual. It seemed that even he had forgotten about it. But 30 years old, was a full 10. And it was also the beginning of a man's most handsome and charming age. If she really didn't celebrate his birthday for him, it would be too unreasonable of her to do so. But as for the suggestion to wrap herself up as a birthday present, she very much rejected it. After all, this kind of thing was really too embarrassing. In particular, under the suggestion of the company's various employees, Xia Tian and Xiao Ba forcibly took Jinwan to the mall and dragged her into a lingerie shop to try on a set of sexy lingerie. And it was the kind with cat ears. What on earth were these two women thinking? In order to make her quickly give birth to a child, they couldn't wait to send her to Mo Jingshan's bed every day, right? She silently hooked the hairband of the cat ears with her index finger and looked at the two women, who didn't want to make things worse. Xiao Ba. Boss, if you really don't know what gift to give him, just sell your body. No matter what, CEO Mo has always been so good to you. If you take the initiative to flirt with him, even if he eats you clean, you won't lose out. Anyway, you're husband and wife. If you want to eat him clean, you've already eaten him clean. Jinwan. Xia Tian. That's right. When it's time to make a move, you have to make a move. Tell me, when have you taken the initiative in front of Mo Jingshan? If you deliberately flirt with him, seduce him, do you think the usually calm and collected CEO Mo will directly have a nosebleed? Jinwan. It was possible that she would have a nosebleed. Xiao Ba. Boss, you can do it. Xia Tian. You can do it. Bravely wear it back for him to see. Jinwan. Who could help her chase these two crazy women out? In the end, Jinwan still succumbed to their power and had no choice but to buy the set of clothes back. Originally, she had a business meeting at the company. Xia Tian and the others said that there was no need for her to go. But this time, the business partner she had to meet was very important. Jinwan put on a serious expression and insisted on returning home after the business meeting. The matter of celebrating Mo Jingshan's birthday was directly thrown to the back of her mind. And then the result was, when she returned home, it was already past 11 o'clock p.m. There was still half an hour before Mo Jingshan's birthday party ended. Recently, the two of them had been staying at Aolan International and did not return to the U Garden. She quietly pushed open the door and saw that it was pitch black. She finally released a long sigh of relief in her heart. Although Mo Jingshan had been very busy after returning to High City, he should be able to understand her coming home a little later today. After all, everyone had work to do. Although the scope of her a little later seemed a little too wide. Jinwan carefully removed her high heels and tiptoed into the bedroom like a thief. Pa! The living room lights turned on. She was startled and immediately straightened up. She happened to see Mo Jingshan standing in the middle of the living room with his arms crossed and a heavy expression. Chapter 734. Why didn't you turn on the lights? Jinwan softly muttered. What do you think? Mo Jingshan was dressed in dark blue home clothes, but it did not diminish his imposing aura. How would I know? Jinwan fearlessly replied. After speaking, she buried her head, as though afraid that Mo Jingshan, who had a terrible birthday, would beat her in the next second. What made her feel even more guilty was the equipment she was wearing under her clothes. Earlier, after returning from the business meeting, she was forcefully dragged into the break room by Xiao Ba and Xia Tian to change her clothes. Then, he came back wearing the clothes he had bought during the day. He only had a white cashmere coat on the outside. While changing, Jinwon's heart was already wailing. Who could tell her? Why was there a collar on this kinky lingerie? Why was there a bell on the collar? These two women. Deducting her wages. At that time, she stood in front of the mirror with a red face and indignantly tied the bell around her neck. She then wrapped a thick scarf tightly around her neck to ensure that there would not be any jingling sounds when she walked. But to be honest, right now she only felt suffocated. His slippers stepped on the wooden floor silently. She could only see Mo Jingshan's slender legs approaching her dangerously. A week ago, you specially reminded me to celebrate my birthday. It's rare for me to remember this day clearly and come back early. In the end, this is the birthday you want to celebrate for me? Mo Jingshan stopped 10 centimeters away from her. His slightly hoarse voice rang above her head, filled with a hint of anger. Without raising her head, she could tell what his expression was like. It should be very bad. That's right, a week ago, she had specially mentioned that he was about to celebrate his 30th birthday. Mo Jingshan said that he rarely celebrated his birthday and did not need to do anything. But she said that he had to celebrate his 30th birthday. Thus, he had remembered this matter. In the blink of an eye, the person who had spent almost all the 24 hours of the day was her. Jinwon wanted to refute, but was forced back by Mo Jingshan's pressing body. Cough, it's my fault. I have a business meeting tonight, so she had better obediently admit her mistake. After all, today was the birthday boy's birthday. However, when she decided to lower her head and admit her mistake, Mo Jingshan stared at her neck for a long time. She felt that the great CEO Mo seemed to be stunned for a few seconds. He looked at her tightly wrapped cashmere coat with an unclear meaning, but in the end, he still turned to the side and allowed her to enter the house. The air conditioner was turned on in the room, and it was so warm that it even made her feel a little hot. She subconsciously wanted to take off her coat and scarf, but when she thought of the outfit inside, she swallowed her saliva and decided to stay calm. She shouldn't have worn it. She must be crazy to have been encouraged by Xiao Ba and Xia Tian to wear such a thing. Mo Jingshan closed the door and went to the kitchen to pour 2 glasses of water. The food on the table was already cold. He clearly had no intention of letting her eat. He came to sit by her side and handed her the water. Seeing that she was still wearing such a thick coat and scarf, he asked calmly, "Aren't you hot?" "It's not hot, it's not hot. It's cold." Ha. Ha ha. He touched her cheeks that were even redder because of the heat. He raised his brows and was about to say something when Jinwon subconsciously reached out to cover his mouth. "I'm fine really." His warm breath landed on her fingers. It was soft. After being husband and wife for so long, Jinwon finally realized that ever since she was reborn and took the initiative to seduce Mo Jingshan, it seemed like this man had always been the one taking the initiative. Regardless of what it was, even on the bed, he always stood in the dominant position. This was the first time she had done such a thing. She could not help but feel a little guilty. The moment her hand touched his lips, she rushed to pull it back. However, the man covered her hand with his, moving it to his lips for a light kiss. He then let her do as she pleased. Jinwon stared at his handsome face in a daze. She was even slightly dazed. Such a good man. A man that so many women drooled over. How did he become her man? "What are you thinking about?" He held her hand. Seeing that she was staring at him in a daze, he used some force to call back her wandering thoughts. "I'm thinking that there's only a little time left before midnight. What should I do to make up for your 30th birthday?" She spread her fingers apart and intertwined them with his. His long, slender fingers felt even hotter against her face. He held her hand and watched her face. He did not speak, nor did he reprimand her for returning too late. Just as Jinwon thought he was about to say something, his other hand suddenly wrapped around her waist and pulled her into his embrace. "It's good that you're home safely. If you were any later, I'm afraid I would have sent bodyguards to your company to search for you." This man was really constantly worried about her safety. He did not plan to pursue the matter of her not celebrating his birthday with him. Jinwon leaned into his embrace, her fingers tracing the lines on his clothes. She closed her eyes to feel his steady heartbeat and softly said, "What could possibly happen to me? Unless someone is drooling over my beauty again." The man chuckled lightly. Outside the window, fine snow drifted down slowly. The room was as quiet as a dream. However, this was a dream. It was 2F*King hot. The clothes and scarf that were too thick for the room made it increasingly difficult for her to breathe. Her eyes seemed to be covered by a thin layer of mist. Even Mo Jingshan, who was so close to her, could not see clearly. She turned her face slightly and rubbed her eyes, trying to rub away the mist. However, it was counterproductive, and her vision became increasingly blurry. Mo Jingshan sensed her movements and raised his eyes to carefully watch her reddening face. "What's wrong with you?" To Jin Wan's slightly flushed skin, his palm was slightly cold and extremely comfortable. She subconsciously rubbed against it. When she heard his words, she suddenly remembered the clothes she had specially worn for him, and immediately bounced up from his lap. "Ah, it's all right. I'll go wash my face." After speaking, she immediately carried it into the bathroom. The full-length mirror in the bathroom reflected the woman wrapped in a thick coat and scarf. Her face was crimson, reflecting her dark and clear eyes, making her look somewhat beautiful. She tugged at her scarf. After hesitating for a moment, she untied it and put it in her bag. The bell on her neck jingled as she moved. Listening to the sound, she sniffled and blinked at the mirror. She felt that this was a completely different feeling from the time when she kept winking at the mirror during the wedding photo shoot. One time, she was just doing it for the photo shoot, and the other was for real. Mo Jingshan stood in the living room. Hearing the movements inside, he walked over and opened the bathroom door. However, Jin Wan, who had already taken off her coat, was standing inside. She was about to come out when their eyes met. Chapter 735. When Jin Wan said these words, it happened to be 12 o'clock. Thankfully, she made it in time. However, the man stood outside the bathroom door, staring at her as she walked out. Jin Wan did not have the courage to raise her head. After speaking, she lowered her head and looked at his slippers. She was so nervous that she could barely hear her own breathing. She then added in a small voice, "Happy birthday, Mo Jingshan." Those who don't know might think that my slippers are called Mo Jingshan. There was a smile in his eyes. He raised his hand to rub her hair, chuckling softly. "Look into my eyes." Jin Wan reached out to remove his hand from her hair. She raised her head to glare at him. The shyness in her heart was truly unbearable. She could not help but bring his hand to her lips and bite down hard, trying to vent her nervousness. However, the man raised his brows and glanced at her before releasing her. However, he did not let go of her hand. Instead, he carried her in his arms. With a pious expression, as though he was about to open a present, he carried her into the bedroom. Jin Wan's face was red the entire time. There was no need to say more. They had been husband and wife for so long. He could easily tell why she was dressed like this, what she was thinking, and how shy she was. The bedroom was slightly dark. Mo Jingshan carried her to the bed and sat down. He placed her on his lap and wrapped his hands around hers, holding them gently in his palms. Jin Wan felt that the redness on her face that had just faded was beginning to heat up again. She raised her head to glance at his expression. She suddenly felt that perhaps she was dressed too much like a kitten today. It was rare that this man did not transform into a beast. Instead, he was so gentle and patient, as though he wanted to put her in his eyes and melt her away. Anyway, her clothes had already been changed. The plan to use her as a birthday present was already halfway done. No matter how embarrassed she was, it seemed like there was no need. Jin Wan closed her eyes and leaned forward to kiss the corner of the man's lips. Because of her action, Mo Jingshan chuckled. Just as Jin Wan was about to move away, he pressed the back of her head to prevent her from leaving. His lips and tongue pressed down on hers. "Did you eat at the dinner party tonight?" His kiss landed on the corner of her mouth. His low, husky voice made her heart tremble. He still did not forget to care about her. Jin Wan made a muffled end sound. "I did. Then it's my turn." She didn't react for a moment. When she understood, she was pressed into the bed by the man who was no longer gentle. When Jin Wan learned that the floors above her residence in Yuehu Bay belonged to Mo Jingshan, she was not surprised at all. At first, she didn't think of it, but later, she gradually felt that there was such an ability to ensure her safety without being discovered. and there were so many strange coincidences everywhere. After thinking carefully, she guessed it was Mo Jingshan, but she didn't dare to be too sure. When she was about to go out with Mo Jingshan to finish her unfinished vacation, the housekeeper from Yuehubei came to deliver the clothes she wanted to take out. She recognized the housekeeper as the one on the 16th floor, and the answer was self-evident. She had questioned Mo Jingshan about this matter. However, Great Boss Missouri had replied indifferently. At that time, there were too many people chasing after her. If he didn't despicably separate those who wanted to be neighbors with her, she would have been cheated away by others before he could do anything. Even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance, he couldn't let it go. Look, even Mo Jingshan himself admitted how despicable he was. Fortunately, Jinwan had guessed it, but she wasn't sure. Now that she thought about it, she finally understood why Mr. Vince had repeatedly applied for the house in Yuehubei, but had been rejected. TSK. She really couldn't tell that Mo Jingshan was even more shameless than she had imagined. No, she had seen his even more shameless side. What was there to be surprised about? As the saying went, all businessmen were cunning. If Mo Jingshan wasn't shameless or despicable, how could he have become a fearsome existence in the business world? However, when Jinwan checked the house in Yuehubei, she also checked the relationship between the house and herself. It turned out that long before she moved in, the entire several floors of Yuehubei's properties had been transferred to her name, which meant that the houses worth hundreds of millions of yuan were all hers. At the same time, Jinwan checked the assets under her name, only to find that Ling Xiao Group had ceded part of its assets to her before she came to her senses. Half of Xiao Xinjuan's private property had also been transferred to her name. Although Jinwan didn't plan to accept it, she also asked the legal department and a lawyer to return these things that didn't belong to her. However, before doing so, she counted all the assets under her name, took a screenshot, and sent a photo to Mo Jingshan. Jinwan, am I now the richest woman in China? The Ji family, the Xiao family, and MN Group's money added together should be enough, right? However, Mo Jingshan's reply to her was, tomorrow, I'll transfer all the assets under my name to you. You'll be the richest woman in China. There's no need to add the word woman. Jinwan, I don't want to. I'll return the Xiao family's assets to them as soon as possible. And I don't need the Ji family's assets. My father can manage the company for at least another 20 or 30 years. I don't want to take on so many responsibilities. MN Group is enough to make me anxious. She didn't need the title of the richest woman. Just the 3 words Mrs. Mo were enough. Jinwan's vacation in London, Greece, Egypt, and all over the world began again. But as soon as she returned from Egypt, she had to stop. Because recently, wherever she went she vomited. She couldn't hold on any longer, and was forced to go to the hospital by Mo Jingshan. It turned out that she was already more than a month pregnant. When she did an ultrasound examination, she found that there were 2 small things in her belly for more than a month. No wonder her morning sickness was so severe. She was actually pregnant with 2. When she saw the 2 small indistinct images on the ultrasound, Jinwan didn't expect it at all. But the smile on Mo Jingshan's face didn't disappear from beginning to end. At night, when she went to bed, Jinwan leaned against Mo Jingshan's arms. All day long, she would often look at the ultrasound to make sure she wasn't dreaming, and that she was really pregnant with 2 babies. When she finally fell asleep, Mo Jingshan stroked her hair and said softly, all that you've lost one day will come back to you in another way. Chapter 736. 1 year later. Ding dang dang dang. In the morning, Jinwan was still dreaming in bed when her phone alarm began to ring. She narrowed her eyes and searched for her phone. When she opened it, she saw the 2 words on the alarm clock feed. This was an automatic reminder from her phone every morning. The 2 babies needed to be fed 150 milliliters of milk powder, or breast milk each after they woke up. The Mo family had specially hired a nutritionist to arrange a daily feeding method, according to the weight and condition of the 2 babies. It was said that this method of mixing milk powder and breast milk was very beneficial for the growth of the twins born at the same time. However, This alarm could only serve as a wake-up call for Jinwan. It had been 3 months since the birth of Mo Jinan and Mo Jining. As long as she didn't have to hold and feed the babies, the family basically didn't ask her to do anything. Mrs. Wanzhou had specially flown from Los Angeles to High City to personally take care of the babies for more than 2 months. Recently, she had to fly back to America due to some matters. At home, there was a nanny arranged by grandfather Mo, but as long as Auntie Chun was around, there was basically no room for others to interfere. The names Inan and Ningning were given by elder Mo. The old man only hoped that the babies would grow up healthily and peacefully. On the day these 2 little things were born, when he learned that they were a boy and a girl, the old man leaned on his walking stick outside the delivery room and was so excited that tears streamed down his old face. In the first few days, he didn't even sleep. He just sat by the small bed and watched the 2 little guys drink their fill and sleep, not even willing to blink. Originally, when the old man learned that Jinwan was pregnant, he was overjoyed and said that he would love it no matter if it was a boy or a girl. He didn't expect that in the end, this little girl not only got pregnant, but also gave birth to a pair of twins. The old man was so happy that he seemed to have suddenly become 20 years younger. Anan was the elder brother. He was born half a minute earlier than Ningning. The 2 babies looked a little small when they were born, but they could eat and sleep well in the past 3 months. They were white and chubby, and were especially lovable. Except for crying a few times when they were hungry, they were obedient and never cried at other times. They were so young and didn't know anything, but as long as an adult held them and teased them, the 2 children would especially cooperate and giggle, which made the whole Mo family treat the 2 children as treasures and like them very much. Not only the Mo family, but the Ji family and the Xiao family also couldn't help but come to the Yu Garden to see the children again and again. Jinwan didn't refuse or stop them. After all, although she had the right to choose her father, she didn't have the right to choose a grandfather for the children. Besides, even if there were 2 grandfathers, it didn't matter. They were both good to the children. When Jinwan was pregnant with 2 babies at once, she suffered a lot during the 9 months of pregnancy. After the baby was born, except for feeding the baby, Mo Jingshan didn't ask her to intervene in anything else, and only asked her to rest. So her usual state in the Yu Garden was, Mo Jingshan was either in the study, because of work, or taking care of the children with Auntie Chun. Mo Jingshan even fed the 2 children more than Jinwan. Although breast milk was necessary, the 2 little things were too big, and had to be fed with milk powder. Moreover, the 2 little things especially liked to drink milk powder in their father's arms. Every time they drank milk, they would stare at their father with round eyes and smile. But when they drank milk in Jinwan's arms, they ate and slept at the same time. They didn't give her any face at all. Now Mo Jingshan, the global CEO of Shine Group, had become very good at making milk powder for the children. Even Jinwan couldn't control the temperature of the water well, and often made mistakes in the order of pouring milk powder and water into the bottle. But Mo Jingshan was obviously much more professional than her. Jinwan could only put on Mo Jingshan's nightgown every day, nestled on the sofa in the Yu Garden, holding a fruit plate, and eating all kinds of nutritious nuts and fruits. Other mothers complained that they were busy and tired after becoming mothers, but since she gave birth to the babies, she was so idle that she was about to go moldy. The company gave her a year of maternity leave, and MN Group was now managed by someone. There was no need for her to interfere at home. Sometimes she looked at her phone. Sometimes she watched TV. Sometimes she looked at Mo Jingshan. Most of the time, Mo Jingshan's mind was on her and the children. Many of the company's unfinished business were sent to the Yu Garden by Shin Mu for him to review. When he finished feeding the children and turned to answer the company's call, he allowed Jinwan's gaze to move from his face to his collarbone and then to his chest. She did not even let go of the joints of his fingers. She stared at him back and forth 800 times. Occasionally, he would raise his head from the company's documents and reports. In the end, under Jinwan's pitiful attack, he gave in and allowed her to hold the children for a while. In fact, the reason why Mo Jingshan asked her to hold the children as little as possible was because Auntie Chun had said that many women were prone to postpartum illness after giving birth. Most of them had back pain from holding the children. Even though Jean Wan's postpartum period had long passed, she had given birth to 2 children at once. In order not to leave her with any uncomfortable symptoms, Mo Jingshan did not allow her to do anything that was too tiring. Even when she fed the children, she had to limit the time, and was not allowed to hold them for too long. Usually, under Jean Wan's aggressive gaze, Mo Jingshan would allow her to hold the children for a while. Jean Wan obtained the opportunity to hold the babies, and Daddy Mo, once again, obtained the opportunity to make 2 bottles of milk powder for the children. After sleeping peacefully, Jean Wan carried Ning Ning, who was awake on the small bed. She walked around the kitchen with the children in her arms, and turned to see the man who was measuring the water temperature inside. His actions were completely unlike the aloof, noble, and unapproachable CEO of Shine Group. If his current appearance was posted on the company's website, it would most likely cause an uproar in the industry. Who would have thought that the all-powerful CEO Mo in the business world would be labeled as such a warm man at home? Auntie Chun went out to buy groceries, and there were only the 2 of them at home. On weekdays, as long as the babies fell asleep, Auntie Chun and the servants in the Yew Garden would intentionally or unintentionally leave them alone. After all, as long as Mr. Mo was at home after work, there would be no problem even if they were not at home. "What do you want to eat tonight?" After making the milk powder, the man did not look back, but asked her patiently and gently. Chapter 737. As she spoke, Jean Wan carried the 3-month-old Mo Jinning, who was already plump and fair. She turned and said as she walked, "Daddy is going to cook, be good and go to the little bed to drink milk. Otherwise, Mommy won't be able to eat dinner, and can only drink your milk powder." Mo Jingshan was extremely disgusted by Jean Wan's threatening the child. However, right now, he was even more shocked by her shameless act of snatching milk from the baby. "Are you hungry or what?" She did not know where he had conjured a small piece of dessert. At the same time he rubbed her head. His actions were the same as when she held the child to feed him. Satisfied, Jean Wan held the child and the dessert in her arms, and returned to the living room. At the same time, she looked back with the spoon on the dessert in her mouth, and happened to catch the tenderness in Mo Jingshan's eyes that he couldn't retract. She thought about how she had spent the entire afternoon either drinking Auntie Chen's food, or sitting on the sofa watching TV, while eating fruits and snacks. Jean Wan reflected on herself for a moment. She bit the spoon and asked, "Have I been eating too much recently?" She did not gain much weight when she was pregnant. In the past 3 months, she had lost a lot of weight. However, according to Auntie Chen, she should eat more to look better. Jean Wan took advantage of the fact that she was still breastfeeding, and did not need to worry about her figure. She ate more and more every day, but she still did not gain weight. The man smiled mildly. "No matter how much you eat, I can still afford to raise you." In the blink of an eye, Mo Jinan and Mo Jinning were 1.5 years old. The spring festival, the 5th day of the year, was the day to welcome the god of wealth. However, their god of wealth had gone to Shine to work overtime. Auntie Chen and the helpers were busy making dumplings, leaving Jean Wan alone with An and Ning Ning staring at each other. And she had big eyes, while the 2 of them had small eyes. Right now this little thing's face was not even the size of a palm. Even if his eyes were as black and big as grapes, they would not be bigger than hers. It was fine to compare now, but in a few years, she would not compare with them anymore. Especially Ning Ning. She was a girl, and her features were like a miniature version of herself. However, she could not tell which part of her was prettier than her. Perhaps it was because Ning Ning often looked like Mo Jingshan? On the other hand, An's facial features were especially similar to his father's. He had been a handsome boy since he was young, but there were some expressions between his eyebrows that occasionally resembled her. The 2 children clearly felt different from each other, but every time they were put together, they seemed to be especially similar. Therefore, human genes were really powerful and magical. They could concentrate the strengths of their parents on their children, and it was as if 2 different people had completely merged into one. That night, By the time the family's god of fortune, Boss Missouri, returned from overtime, it was already after dinner. The company had an urgent matter that required him to personally make a decision, so he had no choice but to return a little late. However, when he returned home, he specially bought 3 servings of children's yogurt and lollipops to express his apology. 2 of them were baby yogurt, and there were also handmade milk lollipops without additives. It was definitely not a problem for babies to eat. The one for Jean was made of the same material, but the larger version had the sweetness of fruit candy. All in all, in his eyes, Jean position was similar to An and Ning Ning's. They were both children who needed to be coaxed. Even if he came home an hour late, he had to quickly coax her to prevent his wife from being unhappy. Seeing that Boss Missouri had such self-awareness, Jean was happy to not have to worry. She held the lollipops and ate them happily. After the spring festival, Mo Xiaoza and Madame Wanzhou missed their children too much in America. They wanted to bring the child to America to stay for 2 to 3 months. Auntie Chen was used to taking care of the child and was worried, so she followed the child to America. Ever since the child was picked up by his grandparents, Jean finally had some free time to work at the company. After work, she wandered around the various pet markets out of boredom. She looked for all kinds of beautiful kittens, thinking that one day, she would be able to live the life of a winner with both a child and a cat. Unexpectedly, when she bought a white rag doll and brought it home for the first time, Mr. Mo, who had rushed home, bumped into her at the door. They looked at each other in silence. He used his eyes to indicate for her to speak first. Jean swallowed her saliva, feeling a little nervous. His expression was so serious that it was as if the words "I'll let you run 39 meters first" were written on his face. "I want to raise it." She raised her head, puffed out her chest, and went straight to the point. "No." The man was resolute and decisive. "This month, I'll definitely eat half a bowl of rice every night." She began to settle for the next best thing. "Is there a point?" he asked in disdain. "I'll wear that sexy cat-eared lingerie that you like so much to warm your bed for a week." In times of crisis, people could be shameless, just like Jean. 1 month. The man was insatiable. 2 weeks. She bargained. 2 months. "Mr. Mo, why didn't you play by the rules?" 1 month deal. In the end, Jean could only grit her teeth in humiliation. Just like that, a new member was added to the family. Jean named the ragdoll Mo Xiaoshan. Every time she called the cat, Mo Jingshan would subconsciously raise his head and pretend to cough before burying his attention back into the pile of documents. Mo Dashan, to think that you would have such a day." Jean favorite time was every morning when she secretly opened her eyes. At that time, the sun had just climbed out of the horizon. Mo Jingshan punctually appeared in the open kitchen on the 2nd floor, unhurriedly making breakfast for the babies who had returned home. Sometimes, in order not to wake her up, he would close the bedroom door tightly when he left. Thus, Jean quietly got up and peeked through the crack in the door to see that he had prepared An and Ning Ning's breakfast. He then cut the fresh fish into small pieces and placed them on a plate. He casually placed it in front of Mo Xiaoshan and got up to continue washing his hands. The rising sun tore apart the curtain of the night. With a slowly awakening warmth, it gently climbed over his shoulders and plated his body with a warm layer of gold. He turned around in the sunlight, and she saw his dark eyes brimming with love that only she knew. End of text. It's over. Thanks to the baby's support, Mo Tuchuan and Jean story has come to a successful end. But the end is the beginning. I will send you a fragrant new novel as soon as possible. But recently, I should focus on writing about Nan Heng and Feng Ling's side story. After all, this is also a very interesting story about a woman disguised as a man that I have been looking forward to for a long time. In my eyes, this pair is actually the main CP, not the secondary CP. After all, a woman disguised as a man is one of my favorite themes. Because Nan Heng has always been relatively mysterious and has not appeared in many scenes, the content of the plot will not be limited by the main plot and the timeline. It can definitely be regarded as a wonderful new novel, the kind that is very doting, very exciting, and will definitely not let everyone down. The side stories updates are also no less than 6,000 words per day. For those who are not sure whether to follow the side story or not, they can first read the plot tomorrow and continue to follow it if they like it. Nan Heng's side story introduction. The little disciple who used to eat and sleep with me, and who was kicked off the bed by me many times because she never took off her clothes when sleeping with me. I spent several years training this boy, but she suddenly became a girl. Now I can't face the 2 buns on her chest. What should I do? I'm waiting online urgently. Chapter 738. Go away! Feng Ling abruptly kicked away the 2 doctors around the bed. But at the moment when she got up, she fell back on the bed, because she had just been injected with a tranquilizer. Seeing her stubborn look, the doctor said to the person next to him, "Look at this child's temper. He refuses to accept treatment even when he is injured. How can he live in the orphanage in the future? You are kind enough to accept him, but I don't think he wants to appreciate your kindness." The director of an international orphanage in Los Angeles did not speak at first, and then looked thoughtfully at the 12-year-old child on the bed. This child was a member of an underground mafia group that the American police wiped out half a month ago. He was young and an orphan. According to the police, this child was named Feng Ling. When he was 5 years old, his boss found him in a wolf cave on the mountain. At that time, Feng Ling could not speak and could only bark. He was a baby raised by wolves. When he was 5 years old, his boss took him away and trained him to be their puppet. Because of his young age, he was not guarded by the enemy when he went out on missions, and he had the shrewdness and decisiveness of a wolf. Even though he was young, he was trusted by his boss. Because of his young age, and the way he grew up, the police believed that his nature should not be bad because of the environment he grew up in. So they did not put him on the criminal list, and only sent him to the orphanage. When Feng Ling was sent in, his body was covered with wounds, but if the doctor hadn't given him a tranquilizer, the room would have been torn apart by him. 1 year later, Feng Ling sensed that something was wrong. She abruptly opened her eyes, only to see a little girl in a pink dress standing by his bed with a curious expression. She was holding a flower in her hand and staring at him with a red face. In a trance, Feng Ling moved his hand and felt that the amount of tranquilizer the doctor gave him this morning was not much. After a year of drug control, she had no extra energy every day and could only get up to eat and walk at most. This was the method that the director of the orphanage came up with. He kept her in order to cooperate with the police, but did not allow her to have too much energy to make trouble. He arranged her alone in a dark and depressing room, where she could only see the stars through the small lattice window. "Brother Feng Ling, why do you sleep alone in the small room every day?" The little girl by the bed grew up in an orphanage. She was only 12 or 13 years old, but she seemed to know what it meant to like someone. When she looked at Feng Ling, her eyes were watery and full of expectation. Feng Ling ignored him and got off the bed. Feng Ling had always lived in this room alone. She was used to such darkness and looked at the mirror. The youth in the mirror was tall and slender. Even though he was only 13 years old, he looked much taller than many of his peers. His face was pale and cold, and his eyes were so bright that even the stars outside the window couldn't compare. His messy, jet-black hair looked slightly dispirited. With a casual flick, his short hair instantly looked much more supple and docile. The little girl was dumbfounded as she watched from the side. Feng Ling was the best-looking boy in the orphanage, but he usually didn't like to interact with others or make friends. No matter when he was eating or being called to group classes by the teachers of the orphanage, he would always sit in the corner coldly and quietly. He had a completely unapproachable temper. The boys especially hated him, because almost all the girls liked to sneak glances at him. Even if he had a bad temper, the girls would always find opportunities to approach him, although every time they tried, they would get cold indifference. Although this beautiful boy's temper was really cold, there seemed to be deep whirlpools in his eyes, like stars in the darkness, bright and dazzling. He was so beautiful, but he was not as annoying as other boys. He always came and went alone. The black earring on the boy's ear seemed to carry a sharp dark light, mysterious and unfathomable. Feng Ling closed his eyes and the extraordinarily beautiful boy in the mirror also closed his eyes. Brother Feng Ling, do you want to go eat with me? I heard that the cook made hamburgers today. Hearing the shy and noisy voice of the little girl, Feng Ling frowned impatiently. Shut up and get out. The little girl should have been afraid, but she had long known his temper, so she walked over and handed him the flower in her hand nervously. Brother Feng Ling, I just want to be friends with you. Feng Ling's eyes opened instantly. In this dim and narrow room, it was like a dagger lurking in the dark for a long time, making people shudder. He glanced at her coldly, and the little girl was frightened by his eyes. She immediately dropped the flower, turned around and staggered out. The room was quiet again, and the boy in front of the mirror looked indifferent. When she was taken out of a wolf's cave at the age of 5, she knew that she was not a wolf, but a human, and gradually understood that she was a girl. But in the world of the mafia, she had to dress up as a boy to be able to move freely. She had to train and carry out tasks as a boy to have food. Otherwise, she could only be killed as trash. If she wanted to live, she could only forget the fact that she was a girl. As time went by, even she couldn't remember whether she was a man or a woman. She remembered that when she was in the hands of the mafia, she once sneaked into the headquarters of the FBI to install a listening device. Many American police had dispatched a large number of police cars in order to catch her, but she still managed to escape. Even a few strong police officers were no match for her. But she never expected that in the past year, she was controlled here by these so-called doctors, who saved the dying and helped the wounded with a tranquilizer a day. The front door of the orphanage was rarely open, and 3 or 4 tall top-grade military Hummers were parked outside. The door was opened. Boss, a member of 11 Base who was about to finish his service, stood in front of the door and looked respectfully and solemnly at the man who got out of the car. Here we are. Nan Hung responded indifferently and walked in. Seeing that the rumored Nan Hung finally appeared, the director of the orphanage hurried to greet him. Mr. Lee, it was your father who came here to select people a few years ago. Today is the first time I see you, Mr. Lee. Please forgive me for my negligence. Chapter 739. Yes. But Mr. Lee, you are the person in charge of 11 Base after all. The children in our orphanage will rely on you to take care of them in the future. They are all fatherless children and are very naughty. If they can pass the training of 11 Base and become the pillars of the future, it will be really a good thing. Nanhing ignored the director's politeness. The quadrennial screening of 11 Base was just a routine. Usually, only 1/10 of the people could be selected by 11 Base for training, and sometimes even less than 1/10. After all, not everyone had the ability to pass the tests and checkpoints set up by 11 Base. To become a member of 11 Base, one had to be fully qualified in both physical and mental quality and physical quality. When the rumored eldest son of the Lee family, Lee Nanhung, walked in and completely appeared in everyone's sight, the female teacher who had been teaching the children in the orphanage for many years was instantly stunned. His eyebrows were sharp, his eyes were deep, his nose was high, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. Was this man painted? As early as an hour ago, almost everyone in the orphanage, from the director to the cleaners, gathered in front of the door, waiting for the legendary eldest son of the Lee family, Lee Nanhung, to appear. The Lee clan had great achievements and accomplishments in assisting the military affairs of both China and the United States. On the surface, they were mainly doing business, but in reality, they had the world's largest training base in the dark, providing elite talents to the two countries' militaries. The Lee family also had an extraordinary position in the United Nations Department. They kept a low profile because they controlled more than half of the military administration in the United States, and the Los Angeles Police and other police forces in the United States could be deployed by them at any time. The so-called Lee family, in more than half of the legal areas in the United States, could even shake the coastline 10,000 meters away with a casual stomp of their feet. Lee Nanhung grew up in 11 Base. As the eldest son of the Lee family, and the person in charge of 11 Base, he was mysterious. Now that he suddenly appeared here, everyone in the orphanage was trembling. It was said that this man came in person and had a bad temper. Several well-dressed boys surrounded the tall and thin boy in the orphanage cafeteria. Feng Ling narrowed her eyes, and the surrounding temperature suddenly froze to the extreme. With a clatter, the meal Feng Ling had just fetched was snatched by one of them and fell to the ground, spilling soup and food all over the floor. Someone even kicked the chair behind Feng Ling away and looked at him with a gloomy face. "Brat, you've only been in the orphanage for a year. Do you really think you're a young master? You can only pretend to be deaf and dumb when we talk to you, right? I really don't want to stay in the orphanage with people like you for another second. When we are selected into 11 base, you can continue to stay in this damn place and wait for death. Anyway, Director Lin always treats you as a deaf and mute, and even your name is not on the selection list of the base. Tut, what a useless waste. 11 base?" Feng Ling's eyes were cold, but she remained calm. When she was working for the mafia, she did hear of 11 base. It was said that it was a place related to the military training of the National Defense Forces and had a deep connection with the American police. It was a mysterious place that was very difficult to provoke, and it was a place that made many underground mafia in the United States tremble with fear. However, the base had nothing to do with her. She hated people who were too arrogant in front of her. "If you don't want to stay, get out of here. Do you have to bark in front of me? Or do you want to be selected into that base with a swollen face?" Feng Ling's expression was very indifferent, and her voice was as careless as her expression. "Get out of my sight in 3 seconds. Brat. How dare you be so arrogant? TSK, your origin is unknown, but your name is very nice. You're called something Feng, something Ling. I heard that there's a very famous Chinese family in the United States with the surname Feng. That's a good family that you won't be able to get into. Who gave you the courage to give yourself such a name?" When Feng Ling was taken out of the wolf's cave at the age of 5, she had been wearing a jade plate engraved with the word Feng on her neck. At that time, there were several Chinese in that group who could read Chinese characters, so they directly took the word Feng as her surname. Since then, she has been called Feng Ling, ignored the provocation of these boys, and was about to turn around when she suddenly heard one of them reach out to hold her down. Her eyes flickered. This morning, when the doctor gave her a sedative, he was probably still asleep and pulled out the needle halfway. Feng Ling, who had long developed a resistance to this kind of sedative because she had been taking sedatives for a long time, was not as weak as usual. She buckled her shoulder with one hand and easily turned her wrist. Suddenly, there was a crack sound of wrist dislocation, followed by a scream. "His hand is disabled." Feng Ling turned back lazily, still casually glancing back at the boy who was holding his wrist in pain and twitching all over. At the same time, she coldly glanced at the others. "Brat, how dare you hit me?" The man whose wrist was dislocated instantly roared in anger. His face was twisted in pain and he shouted, "Hold him down! Take off his clothes! Throw him into the yard for those girls to see. I want to King see how much guts he has." Not only did Feng Ling not panic because of his words, but those people also did not expect that he actually had some skills. After all, in the past year, Feng Ling had always been alone. No one knew what his real situation was. They only knew that he had a cold temper and was not to be trifled with. Unexpectedly, as soon as the group of people pounced forward, they did not see Feng Ling make any obvious movements. She only raised her hand casually, but with a carefree and unrestrained fierceness, the empty bowl on the table next to her, which someone had just finished eating, with a paw sound, passed through the crowd and smashed hard against the boy's forehead. "Ah!" The person who was hit raised his dislocated hand, covered his instantly bloody forehead in pain, and fell to the ground. They did not expect Feng Ling to have such skills. Those boys who were about the same age as her, about 13 or 14 years old, instantly froze, not knowing whether to hit her or not. And at this moment, Feng Ling kicked the lower body of one of them. Immediately, another scream sounded. When they reacted, Feng Ling had nimbly flashed out of the encirclement of these people. She expressionlessly picked up the plate on the ground and turned to continue to get food. "Damn this brat. Forget it, just wait. Sooner or later, Someone will deal with him. Feng Ling acted as if she did not hear it. She put the food on a new plate, walked to a clean table not far away, and sat down without looking back. Chapter 740. Hearing this, Feng Ling casually picked up the disposable chopsticks of average quality and turned to look at him. Whether I can be killed or not is a matter for the future. But if you say one more word, I don't mind sending you to hell right now. The boy with blood all over his head. Damn! This Feng Ling had only been in the orphanage for more than a year. He had never contacted anyone. Today was the first time he had seen him fight. She didn't expect him to be so powerful. At night, this was the largest orphanage in Los Angeles, and there were a lot of adopted children. The people of 11 Base arrived at the orphanage in the afternoon. There were a lot of children on the list. They needed to stay here for one night and continue the screening tomorrow. Feng Ling fell asleep on time. After all, she had nothing else to do. However, she suddenly heard the sound of someone walking outside the window. It was rustling, and she knew that the other party was very sneaky and not very above board. It was just an orphanage. How could a thief sneak in? Feng Ling opened her eyes, sat up from the hard bed, looked at the figure flashing by outside the window, got up and walked out. However, when she walked towards the courtyard behind the orphanage, which was specially used to receive adoptive parents and guests, she suddenly saw the boys in the cafeteria during dinner and heard their cursing from a distance. Where did that surnamed Feng come from? He was so ruthless. My head still hurts. Just when they were still cursing, one of them suddenly keenly noticed the movement. The moment he turned to look at Feng Ling, who was walking slowly in the dark, their faces changed in an instant. What are you doing here? Feng Ling didn't answer. The movement she heard just now was definitely coming in this direction, but that person had obviously hidden himself. She just glanced at the bushes around expressionlessly. We have already warned you that after the candidates of our 11 base leave, you can only wait for death. What? You know you are not on the list of this screening, so you come out in the middle of the night to ask Boss Lee for a place? Let me tell you, stay away from Boss Lee. Otherwise, you won't even know how you die. Seeing that Feng Ling still didn't seem to hear their words and didn't pay attention to them, the boy whose wrist had been twisted by Feng Ling and whose forehead was wrapped with a circle of gauze said angrily, "Damn, he is so arrogant. I don't believe he dares to fight against us with the people of 11 Base nearby. Drag him into the water behind us. Today, we should let him know that this is not a place where he can continue to be arrogant." There were twice as many people gathered here tonight as in the cafeteria. There were about a dozen in total. The group of people instantly felt that Feng Ling was going to be unlucky this time. However, just as the dozen or so people stood up and rushed toward her, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked the fastest person to the ground. In an instant, she grabbed the second person's neck and turned her hand. With a beautiful backhand, she pressed the person under her legs, raised her leg, and stepped hard on his back. She bent one knee and stepped on the person. At the same time, she looked coldly at the others who were slow and hesitant. Go ahead if you want to die. The person who was kicked to the ground first felt pain in his internal organs. He raised his eyes in disbelief and wanted to curse but couldn't. He felt that as soon as he opened his mouth, he would spit out blood. Just as the third person was hesitantly about to pounce on her from behind, Feng Ling casually glanced back. When that person saw that she had discovered him, he immediately rushed forward angrily. However, at the moment he rushed over, Feng Ling calmly dodged him. There was no need for her to move at all. The trash in front of her directly pounced on the person she had just stepped on. The two people staggered and fell heavily to the ground at the same time. One of them even hit his head on the stone, instantly joining the group of people with broken heads and bleeding heads. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't seem to be struggling at all, as if even if a dozen of them rushed up at the same time, they would be trampled under her feet at any time. Most of the remaining people had seen her in the canteen, so they didn't dare to step forward again. After hesitating for a long time, they took a few steps back. If you're not blind, you should be able to see that I have a bad temper. Don't provoke me. Otherwise, I don't mind crippling you here tonight. However, Now that you're injured like this, I'm afraid you're not even qualified to be selected by 11 base. Feng Ling coldly opened her pale lips and said emotionlessly. After saying this, she continued to walk in the direction of the back courtyard as if nothing had happened, completely ignoring the dozen or so boys who were stunned on the spot, and continuing to focus on the person hiding in the dark. Just after Feng Ling left, on the second floor of the guest room not far away, 2 members of 11 base stood there and talked. This boy is good at martial arts, and his aptitude is much better than this group of good-for-nothings. The other man leaned against the window, glanced at the figure that Feng Ling was chasing forward, and said meaningfully, "Someone broke in. He should be planning to directly attack Boss Lee. This boy seems to have noticed that someone is coming, and has the courage to chase after him alone. Now we are outside the base. It's not surprising that someone is not afraid of death, and wants to take the opportunity to make trouble. Boss has always been very vigilant. We don't need to take action at all. Let's just wait and see." Just as the man finished speaking, the 2 men turned their eyes and saw that Feng Ling was following the figure in the dark to the sauna room behind. Gee, their Boss Lee liked to take a bath in the sauna room at night. Although the sauna room in this orphanage was shabby, he didn't miss it. Now he was taking a bath in it. If 2 people sneaked in at this time, they didn't know what would happen inside. Where did he go? Feng Ling chased all the way here, and saw that in front of her was the simple sauna room set up in the orphanage. The surroundings were all wooden structures, and there seemed to be lights inside. Logically speaking, it was impossible for that person to sneak in. After all, the angle of the door and the angle of the window made it impossible for him to get in. But in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Turning to look at a towering tree beside the wooden sauna room, she quickly climbed up the tree, and then quickly stepped on the roof. When she suddenly saw that the man had escaped to the eaves not far away, she immediately rushed over with a cold face, and was about to follow him. However, the moment she turned around, she heard the sound of the wooden planks on the roof breaking. She didn't know whether the roof had been trampled by the man just now, or because it had been in disrepair for a long time. With a kacha sound, Feng Ling fell from between the 3 wooden boards. Her hand was about to grab the edge of the board, but the wooden board on the edge also cracked. In less than half a second, Feng Ling's body suddenly fell down weightlessly, and fell into a pool of hot water with a thud. Then she abruptly popped her head out of the water, and suddenly met a pair of cold black eyes in the mist. Chapter 741. In the misty air, Feng Ling couldn't see his face clearly, and could only see a trace of coldness in his dark eyes. She never expected that the wooden sauna room of the orphanage had been in disrepair for so many years that the roof was broken, and she didn't expect that the person below was actually taking a bath. The man who was taking a bath in the huge wooden tub in the sauna room had soaked for a long time, and his healthy wheat-colored skin looked a little pale. When he looked at the boy who only had half his head exposed in the water through the steam, his lazy and cold aura made people instinctively feel danger. "What? Do you want to take a bath together?" Feng Ling wanted to say that she was not interested, but at this moment, she came here to chase the person who was lurking in the dark. She couldn't explain herself if she fell down like this. At first glance, she knew that the man in front of her was not a good person. There had never been such a person in the orphanage, so this man should be from 11 base, but she didn't know what kind of position he had in 11 base. She still calmly submerged half of her face in the water, and the short hair on her head almost covered half of her face because of the water. She could only vaguely see a pair of indifferent and cold eyes through the wet hair. Seeing that she didn't move, Nanheng still sat calmly in the bathtub, his muscular arms casually resting on the edge of the bathtub, and his long and narrow black eyes narrowed. He saw the vigilance and the idea of escaping gradually blossoming in her eyes. The man raised the corner of his mouth coldly. At the moment when she suddenly emerged from the water, he instantly grabbed one of her wrists and backhandedly pulled her back. Nanheng's speed was so fast that Feng Ling almost couldn't dodge. She had been controlled by tranquilizers here for a whole year, and hadn't fought with anyone for a long time. In the blink of an eye, Feng Ling changed from underestimating the enemy to resisting in the next second. She pulled her wrist out of the man's hand as fast as a nimble snake. It was so smooth because both of them had water on them, and there was some special bath lotion in the water, so it was much smoother than usual. Nanhung didn't see the boy's back until she turned around and was about to run. Judging from his figure and back, he was just a child in his teens. The enemy definitely didn't send him here. But how could there be such a child in this orphanage? When he was about to chase after him, he didn't put on his clothes because he was taking a bath. Instead, he pulled off a bath towel and quickly wrapped it around his lower body. Then, he leaped forward and grabbed the teenager's shoulder when the teenager was about to run out of the sauna room. However, when he was about to turn the teenager around to see the teenager's face, the teenager, who had his back to him, quickly pulled off the bath towel and covered the teenager's head with it when he caught a glimpse of the teenager's white lower body. Nanhung couldn't see his face clearly. At the same time, his lower body felt cold, and the towel on his head almost covered him. He raised his hand coldly and waved, and the towel instantly flew to the other side like a living thing. It wrapped itself into a messy ball, smashed heavily on the wall, and then fell to the ground. Feng Ling's movements were still very fast. At the moment when her face was about to be seen clearly, she knew that she probably couldn't escape from the main door. She turned around and rushed back to the bathtub, intending to jump out of the hole on it. At the moment when the person behind her was about to catch her, she reached into the bathtub, scooped up the water, and splashed it hard on his face. Nanhung once again raised his hand to block, but just as the other party was about to take the opportunity to step on the edge of the bathtub and jump up, he instantly rushed forward like an agile cheetah, grabbed her left sleeve, and fiercely pulled her down. In the end, there was only the sound of cloth tearing. Feng Ling's long-sleeve clothes were torn from the shoulder down, revealing most of the white skin below the shoulder. Both of them paused. Feng Ling's expression turned cold, but Nanhung paused for a moment. His cold brows instantly raised with some interest. Even if he only saw it for a moment, he could clearly see the porcelain white skin, and the half of the undeveloped soft and round half that was faintly discernible under the torn clothes. Even if he was still a teenager, the already developed part was too clear a sign of his gender. Female? The moment this thought flashed through his mind, he pulled another hanging bath towel to cover his lower body. Feng Ling's expression was ugly as she swept her leg across the water. She was so angry that she almost flipped the entire bathtub over, causing more than half of the water inside to splash out. All of it was splashed toward Nanhung, who had temporarily stopped because he had discovered her gender. Taking advantage of the 2 seconds when his eyes were smeared with the bath liquid and instinctively closed his eyes, she pulled a towel by the side and wrapped it around her head to cover her face. When she turned around to attack him, her attacks were even fiercer, as though filled with killing intent. Nanhung only closed his eyes for 2 seconds. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the young man's initial attempt to dodge and escape to instantly attack him with murderous intent. The corners of his lips curled up indifferently, and he dodged without leaving a trace. He raised his hand and took the opportunity to pull off the young man's torn sleeve. In an instant, Feng Ling's entire arm was exposed. Her chest that had previously been faintly discernible, as well as her slender waist, were all presented in front of the man's eyes. He spoke unhurriedly. "Are you angry from embarrassment? Not bad at such a young age. And you're even a girl? How did you sneak in?" Feng Ling was enraged. She turned to the side and kicked the wall with one leg, borrowing the force to kick him again. After Nanhung noticed her age, and that she was a girl, he did not attack again. Under her furious attacks, he only moved very casually to defend himself. He pushed her leg away with one hand, then backhanded her, and was kicked away by her. He did not have the slightest intention of fighting seriously. It was as though he was casually teasing a teenage girl. Feng Ling had seen all kinds of bloody storms since she was young, but she had never been teased by a man. She was so angry that she wanted to kill him instantly. However, she could clearly feel that he was very agile. If he really wanted to fight seriously, she was afraid that she would not be his match. At the same time, from the corner of her eye, She saw the clothes of the man placed not far away. It seemed like he had a gun. People with guns were more difficult to deal with. Chapter 742. Nanheng frowned in pain and was about to make a move. However, this time, Feng Ling did not intend to be entangled with him. She quickly dodged his palm and leaped onto the edge of the bathtub. With the help of the wall of the wooden house that was not too high, she stepped on it and jumped out nimbly. Seeing that she had escaped, Nanheng didn't look shocked, but just coldly narrowed his eyes at the cracked hole in the sauna room. A girl who could have such skills in this orphanage was definitely not ordinary. He had planned to test her background and then figure out her purpose, but it turned out that her ultimate goal was obviously not him. Otherwise, she would not have escaped so easily. He's just a teenager. What was her identity? Nanheng slowly withdrew his cold and indifferent gaze and glanced at the sleeve thrown on the ground. The next day, the broadcast in the orphanage rang. The voice was obviously from Director Lin himself. He summoned all the children in the orphanage to the empty field in front of him. No matter men or women, they must all be present. After the broadcast, the director turned back and respectfully looked at Nanheng, who looked calm. "Mr. Li, these children will arrive soon. We thought that you would select them from the list provided by the orphanage, but we didn't expect that Mr. Li, despite being so busy, didn't intend to leave any child with potential behind and planned to meet each and every one of them. This is really a great blessing for them." Nanheng was indifferent and silent. He just stood on the second floor in front of the field and held the railing. The view here was the best and clearest. He looked at the teenagers who gradually appeared in the empty field, half male and half female. Before the headmaster could finish his words of flattery, the children below shouted excitedly when they saw the people above them. Li Nanheng. They actually saw the legendary young Master Li of 11 Base. The Li family was powerful in the military and had the most mysterious and desirable 11 Base in their hands. The whereabouts of young Master Li had always been a mystery and an unattainable existence. But now the legendary young Master Li was standing on the second floor of the stadium in front of their orphanage. He was even looking at them. The children were so excited, as if they would be selected to join 11 Base in the next second. 11 Base was directly connected to the U.S. military and police. As long as they could become a member of 11 Base, they would never have to worry about food and clothing in the future, and they might even have the opportunity to obtain military exploits, whether in the military or in politics. This was not an opportunity that ordinary people could get. If he could do well in 11 Base, it would be an opportunity to reach the sky in a single bound. All the children in the orphanage had arrived. More than 100 children, ranging from 5 to 18 years old, were present. The director called the names one by one, and the children who were called would stand up and respond. However, after spending more than an hour, the 100 or so children had all appeared. But the one Nanheng was looking for was nowhere to be seen. He was sure that the teenager from last night was from the orphanage, because the sleeve that was torn off was the uniform that every child in the orphanage had to wear. It was a black long-sleeved uniform similar to the school uniform, and the name and logo of the orphanage were on the cuffs. But she was not among the more than 100 children. Nanheng's eyes swept over the faces of the children one by one, and he said lightly, "Are you sure they are all here?" "Yes, they are all here. Our orphanage is the largest orphanage run by Chinese people in Los Angeles. At present, there are a total of 127 unadopted children under the age of 18, and all of them are here." The director echoed with a smile. "But 11 Base never accepts girls, right? Why did you suddenly ask for girls to come out today, Mr. Li?" Nanheng didn't answer, but just looked at the faces that were looking in this direction, and the uniform these children were wearing. 127, not a single one was missing. Seeing young Master Li's cold eyes looking at the faces and figures of those children, not knowing what he was looking at or waiting for, the director and other teachers and people in charge of the orphanage all stood aside, not daring to ask a word. The crowd in the venue had gradually become excited. Everyone who was stared at by young Master Li's eyes, whether they were men or women, was full of surprise, and they always felt that happiness was about to come to them. Only Feng Ling, who was sent to the orphanage by the police a year ago, was not included in the list of orphans because of special circumstances. Later, no matter in the group knowledge class or other aspects, everyone only knew that she was here, but they didn't specifically add her name to the list. As a result, when everyone was summoned today, they were so excited that they forgot that there was such a special person in the orphanage. They only checked the number of people in the orphanage and forgot the person who was locked in the dark little room. It was true that Feng Ling usually didn't communicate with others. After being injected with a tranquilizer in the morning, she went to the canteen to eat when she had the strength, and when she had no strength, she waited for the doctor to bring her food. Unless it was necessary, she never appeared in front of others or contacted others, so it was easy to be forgotten. And on such an occasion, even if he accidentally thought of her, he didn't intend to let her appear. Feng Ling was an uncontrollable and bad-tempered boy. If that boy accidentally provoked Li Nanheng, it would be a big trouble for the orphanage. She must not come. However, for some reason, young Master Li's temper was unpredictable. He was usually low-key and mysterious, and now they couldn't figure out what he was thinking. However, Li Nanheng's cold eyes made the president and the others panic. What made them even more nervous was that when young Master Li looked at them, they couldn't tell whether he was indifferent or indifferent. His king-like cold aura made those who were excited at the beginning gradually calm down, and they didn't even dare to breathe. And on the other side, Feng Ling lay on the bed in her dark room, her eyes slightly open, looking at the dim ceiling in a familiar daze. After coming back last night, she simply washed up, changed her clothes, and lay down to sleep. Although she was still half awake at night, the person hiding in the corner didn't appear again. It wasn't until dawn that she fell asleep completely. After falling asleep, a doctor came in on time to give her a tranquilizer. The doctor's movement and the smell of disinfectant on him were very familiar. After a year of contact, Feng Ling instinctively continued to sleep, completely ignoring the doctor. Anyway, they had thousands of ways to inject the tranquilizer into her, and she had long been too lazy to resist. Chapter 743. When it was almost noon, Feng Ling gradually recovered her strength and sat up from the bed. When she was in the hands of the mafia, she was still young. Even if her body had gone through the normal development stage, she didn't pay much attention to the changes in her figure. This year, she rarely contacted others, and she was also used to wearing loose clothes, so she didn't pay much attention to it. What happened last night made Feng Ling more vigilant. She got up and looked around the room, finally finding a soft dress that she hadn't worn for a long time, and then dug out a dagger she had hidden under the mattress for a long time. She cut the clothes into a continuous strip of about 4 or 5 centimeters wide, then took off her clothes, stood in front of the mirror, and wrapped the strip around her body as a chest wrapping cloth. She didn't put on her clothes again until she was sure that the outline of her body was no longer obvious because of the chest wrapping cloth. The boy in the mirror looked a little stronger than usual because of the chest wrapping cloth, and his back didn't look so thin. She glanced at a clear red mark extending from the back of her ear to her collarbone, and a trace of displeasure appeared in her eyes. Last night, the man in the sauna room only defended and didn't attack, but he was fast and accurate in the early stage, and almost caught her neck several times. If he hadn't intended to do anything to her, she probably wouldn't have been able to escape last night. Seeing the red mark left by the man's attack, Feng Ling raised her lips coldly and covered the mark. At the same time, there seemed to be a lot of footsteps approaching outside. Standing in front of the mirror, Feng Ling paused and turned to look at the closed door. Outside the door, Nanheng casually glanced at the short and shabby old building behind the orphanage. Dean Lin hurriedly said, "This is the first building built when the orphanage was just established more than 30 years ago. It has been 30 years and looks a little shabby. There used to be a lot of children living here, but now the children have moved into the new building. It's just used to pile up some sundries. It's dirty and messy inside, so no one usually comes here." Nanheng's eyes fell on the doors under the old building, and saw that the bluestone paths outside the other doors were covered with moss. It was true that no one had entered for a long time, but there was no moss on the path closest to the main road here. Obviously, there were people walking there every day. He only glanced at the door and stopped in his tracks. The dean was slightly startled. Did young Masterly find something? He had never regretted so much that he agreed to let the police send Feng Ling to the orphanage. Although if Feng Ling didn't make trouble, even if young Masterly found out, he had promised in the morning that all the children had arrived. If young Masterly misunderstood that they deliberately hit someone, it would be a big misunderstanding. Suddenly, everyone saw Nan Heng's footsteps approaching the door. There was no extra expression on his noble and handsome face, but there was only a sense of uneasiness. Feng Ling was already standing in the door. She vaguely heard footsteps approaching, and they were only separated by a door. Nan Heng stood outside the door, leaned over, and looked at the bare bluestone path in front of the door. His cold voice was not clear whether he was talking to the people in the door, or the people behind him. Is this the storeroom? How long has it been since anyone went in? Isn't this kind of place the most likely to give birth to all kinds of insects and unknown microorganisms? If something that you don't even know lives in there, don't scare those children. No, young Masterly, you're really funny. Occasionally, there are people in charge of the orphanage who go in to clean and tidy up, but we don't go in often. After all, there is too much dust inside. Dust is not a big deal. If the orphanage is understaffed, I don't mind asking my men to go in and tidy up for you. If there is something that shouldn't exist in there, it will be convenient to kill it. He said lightly, and his voice was so low and cold that only Feng Ling could hear the warning in his words. Feng Ling's face was cold and calm. It was not certain who would kill who. She put the dagger that she had just taken out from under the bed into her clothes with one hand, and silently pressed the door with the other, ready to fight at any time. However, in this orphanage, her hostility had been greatly reduced. If the people outside the door didn't directly attack, she wouldn't rush out to make trouble. Listening to the voice of the man outside, and the conversation between him and the director just now, it was not difficult to infer that the man in the sauna room last night was the legendary Li Nanheng of 11 Base. The director said a few more words outside, trying to explain how dirty and messy the sundries here were, and that they might fall down and hurt people at any time. Even if there were some things, they might be mice and cockroaches. There was no need for the people of 11 Base to make such a big deal out of it, for fear that they would be killed. It was better to ask the people in the orphanage to clean it up themselves. Through the door, Nanheng couldn't hear any movement inside, but with his experience, it was not difficult for him to hear that someone was standing in the door with his breath closed. Last night, he had seen the skills of the boy with his own eyes. The most basic means of self-protection, such as holding one's breath, should be very easy for him. As if because of the director's inexplicable explanation, Nanheng suddenly smiled, but his eyes were indifferent, as if he was going to directly punch a hole in the door. I haven't seen cockroaches and mice for many years. It's a pity that I can't see them. The director kept saying that he didn't want to dirty young Master Li's eyes, and then took the opportunity to ask others to point in another direction and invite young Master Li to visit. Feng Ling still held her breath inside the door. The person outside was silent for a moment and didn't say a word. She leaned against the door and heard the footsteps gradually fading away. Feng Ling turned around and looked out through the gap in the window next to her. When she saw the tall but seemingly dangerous back, she slowly loosened her hand that had been holding the dagger in her clothes. The man didn't look as he did last night, when he was naked in the sauna room, with a faint smile on his perfect upper body. The sunlight fell on his body and seemed to be plated with a layer of unreal golden light. The man's back was noble and cold. Just when Feng Ling was about to withdraw her gaze, he suddenly stopped and glanced back out of the corner of his eyes. She didn't know if he felt her gaze or something else, but he suddenly stopped and glanced back out of the corner of his eyes. Through the hidden gap in the window, Feng Ling instantly felt the man's gaze, which seemed to be full of coldness. She then looked at the group of 11 base subordinates and bodyguards in black suits behind him, and instinctively felt that she had inadvertently provoked a big trouble. Chapter 744. The leaders and the director of the orphanage all breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, young Master Li didn't insist on going in. Otherwise, if Feng Ling did anything disrespectful inside, everyone would suffer with him. It was a false alarm. Only one leader turned around and walked back. He abruptly pushed open the door of Feng Ling's room and saw the slender and thin boy standing in front of the window. He frowned and said unhappily, "It seems that the amount of tranquilizers should be increased in the future. I shouldn't have left such a scourge like you in the orphanage. You are unsociable, indifferent, and don't get along well with others. People like you can't even survive in a place like the orphanage. I think you can only sit here and wait to die. You might as well go back to your wolf cave and continue to be an animal." After speaking, as if he had vented out all the panic he had felt just now, the hospital leader slammed the door angrily, turned around and left. In the room, Feng Ling coldly looked out of the window at the person walking away. She raised her hand and glanced at the small red needle mark that would appear on her arm every day, and the corners of her mouth curled up coldly. Increase the amount of tranquilizers? She had endured it for a year. Did he really think she would be locked up here like a prisoner for the rest of her life? A year was enough for her body to develop natural antibodies to these tranquilizers, and she would gradually recover her strength every afternoon. As long as she wanted to leave, no one could stop her. Her hand paused slightly in her clothes, and she hid the dagger in her clothes again. At the same time, Feng Ling glanced at the sky outside the window, and the indifferent smile on her lips deepened. At night, the advanced military Hummer reflected a layer of cold light in the cold moonlight. After the screening of the orphanage, only 3 or 4 people passed the screening and could be taken back by the people of 11 base for training. The training period was 2 months. If their physical fitness was not up to standard within 2 months, they would still be returned to the orphanage and would never be selected again. Seeing the cold and smooth Hummer leave in the night, the nervous mood of the group of people in the orphanage finally relaxed. At this moment, on the other side of the orphanage, a black figure nimbly flashed past, avoiding all the security guards and surveillance cameras in the orphanage. Since the security guards outside the wall were also at the main entrance today, it was rare for them to be negligent in their defense. He directly flipped over the wall and easily cut the wires of the anti-theft net on the top of the wall. After the power was cut, there was no current in the anti-theft net, so he could climb through it with his bare hands. When the figure successfully climbed over the high wall of the orphanage and quietly walked out in the darkness, everyone thought that the Hummer Li Nanheng was in had sped away. But the Hummer following him stopped a moment ago. "Boss, we found him. He's over there." The driver caught a glimpse of a figure jumping out from the wall of the orphanage. Li Nanheng opened his thin lips slightly and said indifferently, "Keep an eye on him. It seems like he's just trying to escape. He's currently heading towards the main road. The anti-theft net on the walls of the orphanage has a strong electric current. Ordinary people can't get through it at all. This kid doesn't look old, but he's pretty good. He managed to get out safely without being discovered by the people inside." Nanheng didn't stop. He glanced at the direction where the boy escaped and signaled the driver to follow him with his eyes. The black Hummer had been lurking in the night for a long time. In an instant it caught up with him, followed by the cars of several bodyguards. The people in the orphanage didn't know what had happened. 10 minutes later, there was a sudden exclamation from the security room of the orphanage. "What happened?" "The anti-theft net has been destroyed." In the distance, Feng Ling walked on foot. Hearing the sound of the car behind her, she had long guessed that Li Nanheng wouldn't let her go easily. She connected the wires she had just removed from the anti-theft net with the 2 batteries she had secretly carried in her arms. At the moment when the wires were connected at a certain angle, she suddenly threw the wires into the lawn and bushes behind her. In an instant, the wires fell among the flammable bushes. Sparks flew, and there was the sound of electric current. Then there was a sudden burst of flames and crackling noises, causing the black Hummer to stop abruptly before it was about to run over the bushes. Feng Ling took the opportunity to leave through a small road that no cars could pass through. She fled in the opposite direction of the other party's guests. Nanheng got out of the car. and his slender figure walked to the side of the bushes that were instantly ignited. He stood with one hand in his trouser pocket, wearing a black suit jacket that he didn't put on. He raised his cold black eyes to look at the figure that was quickly escaping, and a glimmer of interest appeared in his deep black eyes. The people in the car also rushed down, put out the fire in the bushes, and then sent people to continue to chase. However, half an hour later, they all returned without success. They didn't expect that as the training team of 11 base, they had a zero-failure record in all kinds of tasks, but they were tricked by a teenager and couldn't even catch up with him. How is it possible? Who on earth was that boy? Boss. A few of his men walked back with ugly expressions. That kid's whereabouts are very strange. We've checked all the roads in front of us, but there's no trace of him. The remaining road is a dead end. In the distance is a high mountain jungle. There are wild tigers, wolves, jackals, and other beasts that can eat people alive at any time. The U.S. has never destroyed these natural jungles, nor will they send people in easily. It's full of danger. If that kid ran into that place, I'm afraid he won't be able to survive. Couldn't survive? Nanheng's sharp black eyes glanced in the direction of the jungle, and then glanced at the burnt wires that his men found in the bushes. That was obviously a ruthless little she-wolf. Any wire or battery could give her a chance to escape. Since she dared to break into the jungle, she must have the ability to survive. At this moment of escape, would you think of taking off the wires of the anti-theft net to protect yourself? As Nanheng said, his black military boots fiercely crushed the charred battery fluid on the ground. He looked down at the wires thrown on the ground, the bushes and the jungle in the distance, and his face was cold like the god of darkness. This kind of person at such a young age has such a sharp and decisive mind and skills. We can't let him go easily. If I can find him, he will either be used by me or killed by me. The men on the side looked solemn. For a moment, they couldn't resist the cold gaze in their boss's eyes. It seemed that the boss was already very dissatisfied that they failed to catch that boy. Chapter 745. Of course, wolves, tigers, and leopards in the jungle were no problem for Feng Ling. She grew up drinking wolf's milk, and the skills she learned to survive in the jungle caves before she was 5 years old were not for nothing. She could survive in front of a pack of wolves, and in the face of the great dangers in the jungle and the fighting between beasts, she had a perfect way to protect herself. Perhaps because she had drunk wolf's milk, she had a dangerous smell that only some animals could smell, so no one dared to approach her. It only took her 1/3 of the time of ordinary people to successfully escape from the other side of the jungle, and in case of being blocked outside, she simply swam away through the river in another direction. She finally got ashore, and her clothes were soaked. She could only pile firewood by the river and bake herself for a while. These survival methods in the jungle were so simple that she could find some food and daily necessities by herself in a few minutes. She didn't have any consciousness of being alone in the dark and dangerous, let alone the slightest fear. But she probably couldn't sleep tonight. After all, the group of people who took her in had been arrested, and she had lived in the orphanage for a year. Now the outside world was still strange to her, and she still didn't know how to live like a normal person. Li Nanheng also couldn't fall asleep. The man sat in the tall black Hummer, the window rolled down, and outside was the starlight above the jungle that was more brilliant than in the city. Several men outside the car were still looking for the trace of the boy, and they even waited at the exit of the jungle, where she should have chosen all night. But she didn't come out. The time of the people of 11 Base had always been precious. This time, they went to the orphanage designated by the Li family for business, but at this moment, they spent a lot of time here waiting for a teenage boy. Only Li Nanheng himself knew how precious the time they wasted was. His men walked to the side of the car, and saw that boss was going to continue to wait, and had no intention of leaving. Without young Master Li's permission, no one dared to stop looking for him. It was past 8 o'clock the next day, but there was not even a footprint on the road in the jungle that separated the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. With one hand behind his back, Nanheng walked through the jungle expressionlessly. He glanced coldly at the higher bushes on the other side, which made it impossible to predict what was in the distance, then turned around and walked over. A few hundred meters behind the shrubs was a silent river. It wasn't very wide, but it was obviously very deep. What immediately attracted Nan Heng's attention was a patch of grass on the other side of the river. There was a scorch mark there. Obviously, someone had been warming himself by the fire last night, but that person had already escaped once again. Nan Heng took the unlit cigarette out of his mouth and looked coldly at the charred spot on the table across the river. He only said 2 words, "Very good." His voice was so cold that it made the underlings behind him shiver. They were all too clear about their boss's usual conduct and temper. It was most likely the first time that he, a proud son of heaven in the incomparably honorable Li clan, had been fooled by a stinking brat. Boss probably wanted to tear him apart right now. His men didn't even dare to breathe, silently praying for the brat who escaped from the orphanage, hoping that he wouldn't be caught by young Master Li in the future, or he would be killed directly. Go back to the orphanage to investigate his situation, Nan Heng said coldly. His men mistook the she as he. After all, except for Nan Heng, no one could have guessed that such a nimble and agile boy was actually an incredibly fair-skinned girl. His men quickly rushed back to the orphanage, but the result of the investigation was that even the people in the orphanage didn't know who the boy was. When he went back to explain to young Master Li, his men coughed twice. The entire orphanage didn't know the specific situation of the boy. They only knew that he was a child rescued from the gangsters who were killed a year ago. He was used by the gangsters since he was a child and struggled to survive until he was a teenager. The police had some pity for him, so they sent him to the orphanage. But he never communicated with others and behaved in a way that made people wary of him. They were afraid that he would accidentally offend you, so they didn't let him show up with other children at the same time. Hearing this, Nan Heng's eyes turned cold. The subordinate said again, "Boss, the mafia that this kid was attached to has nothing to do with us. I didn't participate in the police's operation, so I can't directly investigate his situation. I don't think he has any feelings for the mafia, but he is really good at martial arts. The key is that no matter what he does, he is very fast. It's really unexpected." It was more than fast. It could be said that he was fast, ruthless, and accurate. A young girl, but she had the sharp nature and decisive decision-making ability of a jackal. Nan Heng sat quietly in the car, and the cigarette between his fingers was still not lit, but he seemed to be holding a bit of hostility between his fingers. It was rare for someone to escape under his nose. Then he got out of the car and looked down at the jungle in the distance, as if he was stepping on this big half of Los Angeles. Pay attention to the movements in Los Angeles in the next few days. She broke out of the orphanage alone. It won't be easy for her to survive. Nan Heng turned his head, and there was a cold light in his eyes. His men were stunned. Shall we inform the police in various areas? Nan Heng lit the cigarette, and the sparks between his fingers flickered. He narrowed his eyes coldly and said in a very indifferent voice, "No, people who are desperate will choose to walk into a trap." The black Hummer left the orphanage. When passing through the jungle, Nan Heng drove the car to the opposite side of the river. The scorched marks on the ground were still there. Just now, he didn't directly come to the opposite side of the river, but just looked at it from a distance. Now he took a closer look and saw a symbol made of a pile of fine small stones beside the scorched grass. This was a symbol that members of the mafia often used to provoke. Several men followed him, glanced at the ground from behind, and were instantly surprised. Shit! Boss Li, who had always been a terror to the American underground mafia, was provoked by a teenage boy. He was clearly courting death. He looked up and saw that the temperature around Boss seemed to drop to the extreme in an instant. Nan Heng stared at the pile of symbols on the ground, strode over, and stared at the ground expressionlessly for a while. Suddenly, a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. It was not difficult to see that the soil under the pile of symbols was a little loose. It should be some mud mines that were common in the jungle, waiting for him to step forward to destroy the symbols, and then explode him with smelly mud. Sure enough, he was courting death. Chapter 746. The sky brightened too quickly, and the sky darkened too quickly. In the night, Los Angeles was full of music. Fong Ling could clearly feel that she was out of tune with this world. She wasn't hungry. Last night, she had roasted a few fish by the riverbank. Normally, she didn't eat much and could at least last a day. But now that she was walking on the streets of Los Angeles and looking at all kinds of people, she suddenly realized that the environment she grew up in was not the same as here. If she wanted to survive, she had to either return to the jungle or go back to a place where the way of life was not much different from the way she lived in the past few years. But she knew very well how vicious the mafia was. She used to live for food to survive and to not be beaten. But now, which way should she go? Half a year later, in the mountains west of Los Angeles, several explosions and gunshots overlapped, startling the birds in the bushes to fly away. In the past 6 months, Fong Ling was used to looking for food in the woods at night, finding a shelter to live in, and going to the city during the day to find her own way out. Even if she was tired of eating those fish and small animals, she had no concept of robbing them. She even had no concept of money. Even if she robbed them, she could only buy food and didn't know what else to do, so she might as well find her own food to eat. In the morning, hearing the gunshots outside, Fong Ling opened her eyes and looked at the smoke that could be vaguely seen in the air not far away. This place was far from downtown Los Angeles, and the mafia often liked to find such a place to escape. The police often chose this place for military exercises, but the smoke did not look like a simple exercise. Someone was really making trouble here. Fong Ling smelled the obvious smell of gunpowder and followed the smell. But when she saw the blood in the bushes in the woods, she slowed down and looked around for footprints and movements around. Walking deep ahead, she suddenly noticed something. She was about to dodge to the side, but her foot was suddenly held by a blood-stained hand. Her face turned cold, and she abruptly lowered her head to look at the young man who had fallen in the bushes and was covered in blood. She then looked coldly at the hand that was holding her ankle, and the murderous intent in her eyes was obvious. "Don't go over, it's dangerous ahead." However, the man lying on the ground covered in blood said in a hoarse and weak voice. The killing intent in Fong Ling's eyes gradually dissipated. She glanced at his seriously injured appearance and easily shook his hand off. She did not speak and was about to move forward. "There is a small bomb that was recently buried 100 meters away. Don't go over," the man said again. But his voice was very low because he was seriously injured and lost too much blood. Seeing the gun on his waist, she turned back and squatted down to take the gun. The young man, who was covered in blood, frowned and looked at her warily. He saw that she was young, but the temperature in her eyes was so cold that she seemed incompatible with this world. He frowned. "What are you doing?" "I will save you on the condition that you give this gun to me." Fong Ling's words were straightforward and cold. When the man frowned and was about to say something, she quickly picked up the gun at her waist and moved forward. Before the young man on the ground could see her steps clearly, she had jumped up the tree in the blink of an eye, avoided the bombs and mines lying in ambush on the ground, and rushed to the front smoothly. The young man was seriously injured, but the people of 11 Base had always had an established rule. As long as the gun was there, the person was there. 11 Base's bullets must not be used by any enemy or insignificant person. But he couldn't get up after a long time. About 10 minutes later, he vaguely heard a few gunshots, and then there was silence. Then there was the rustling of leaves being rubbed by clothes. He slowly opened his eyes weakly, and in a blur of blood, he saw the slender and thin teenager coming back. A pair of black boots stained with mud and blood stood in front of him. "Were you injured because you were ambushed?" Fong Ling asked. Seeing her come back, the man on the ground immediately answered, "Yes. Your gun is very useful. Give it to me." Fong Ling was not negotiating with him, because she had already killed the lackeys who had set up the ambush. She thought this was the reward and price he should pay. The man on the ground also understood what she meant. Her request was not unreasonable, but 11 Base had its rules. He frowned and looked up at her again. "If you want my gun, that's fine, but our place has a rule. If you're not one of us, you can't use our guns. Otherwise, if I go back empty-handed, I'll be killed because I broke the rule. You've saved me, but you've also killed me. Feng Ling didn't quite understand his words, but she looked at the blood on his body and asked, "Can you still walk?" The man on the ground nodded. "I'm fine. I won't die. I just lost too much blood. I'll be fine after a few hours of rest." Feng Ling glanced at him coldly again. She didn't know the mark engraved under the butt of the gun in her hand, but only knew that this kind of gun was the most comfortable one she had ever seen in her life. For no reason, she was curious about the place this man mentioned. This big city was not suitable for her to live, and as a normal person, she couldn't really go back to the jungle to live. She might as well go to the place he mentioned with the excuse of saving him. Feng Ling looked at the man on the ground and still asked in a flat tone, "What's your name?" "My name is Kay." The man on the ground swallowed the blood in his mouth, raised his head with some difficulty, looked at the cold-eyed boy, and smiled at her gratefully. "What about you? What's your name?" "Feng Ling." When she was brought into 11 base by Kay, Feng Ling felt that this place seemed to be a hidden military training base, but Kay took her into the base from the back road and the side, so she didn't see the sign of 11 base at the front door. After she was officially taken in, she heard the conversation between Kay and the others and realized that this damn place turned out to be 11 base, under Li Nanheng's charge. She almost regretted it. She planned to leave directly, but Kay invited her to stay with a sincere look, saying that he would introduce her to their boss Li, and kept praising her skills with the other bodyguards and brothers in front of the door. Many people were looking at her curiously. It was not difficult to see that these people were good at martial arts. She could escape with the moves she learned from childhood, but in front of so many people, she had no chance of winning. And in a place like 11 base, if she suddenly ran away for no reason, she might not be able to escape at all. "Hey, our boss is back." At this time, Kay suddenly patted her on the arm. Feng Ling turned her head and looked in the direction Kay pointed, only to see that the tall black Hummers she had successfully avoided half a year ago were driving in this direction. Chapter 747. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. This was probably it. At this moment, Feng Ling could only be glad that he didn't see her face in the sauna room. But this was obviously not an easy way to avoid the problem. Seeing that Li Nanheng's car had driven in, Kay took Feng Ling's wrist and was about to walk over, but as soon as his hand touched her wrist, he was abruptly flung away. Kay paused and looked back at her. Seeing Feng Ling's expressionless face, he smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, I forgot that you don't like to be touched." In fact, Kay was only 18 years old, only 5 years older than Feng Ling, but he was still a bit hot-headed. Although Feng Ling was young, her character was calm, mature and indifferent, making it hard for people to see through her. Feng Ling didn't speak but glanced coldly at the black Hummer over there and said indifferently, "Your base is not suitable for me. I don't want the gun. Keep it for yourself. I'll leave later." "Where are you going?" "Thank you for not only saving my life, but also cleaning the wound on my back in the past 2 days. You are my great benefactor. Didn't you say you don't have a place to live outside? Since you are so good at martial arts, why don't you stay in our 11 base in the future?" As Kay spoke, he quietly leaned close to her ear and whispered to the cold-eyed boy, "Let me tell you, not everyone can enter our 11 base, but with your martial arts skills, you can definitely enter. Besides, you have saved me. I just need to tell the drill master. Also, recently our boss has something to deal with at home, and can't often stay in the base, so the drill master will be in charge of the recruitment for the time being. Although our boss is not easy to deal with, the drill master can handle it. Don't worry, he will definitely let you stay." Feng Ling. She didn't want to stay, but there were people with good martial arts skills around, so she stood there quietly and didn't speak. "Our boss has got off. Do you want to see him?" Kay asked. "No." It was a very cold word. His voice was so cold that Kay couldn't help but take another look at him. However, Feng Ling remained expressionless from beginning to end, making it impossible for anyone to see through her thoughts. Because the black Hummer had stopped, many brothers had gone over to say hello, but Feng Ling had no intention of approaching it. She turned to the back of the crowd, crossed her arms over her chest, looked silently at the cars surrounded by people, and thought for a while. 11 Base was indeed the most powerful military training base in the United States. It had connections with both the underworld and the underworld. No one dared to provoke it, and the drill masters and trainers here were said to be top-notch. This kind of place was obviously suitable for her. That was if they were willing to accept her. If Li Nanheng didn't notice that she was the one in the orphanage, she could stay. Besides, there were so many people in 11 Base. There were hundreds of people in the base. And there were also many people who had finished their military service and were working in various police stations in the United States. It seemed impossible for a high and mighty person like him to notice a small character like her. He chased her outside the orphanage because she accidentally saw him taking a bath. Not only that, but also that kind of naked. And because he found out that she was a woman, he probably couldn't bear it. The subsequent chase was probably because of his unwillingness and her provocation. There was no deep hatred or entanglement, so he didn't seem to have any need to pay attention to her. In the end, Feng Ling saw Kay standing in place and didn't go over, so she glanced at him. "Isn't that your boss? Why don't you go over?" In fact, our boss is very cold and bad-tempered, but he has outstanding military exploits, and no one in the whole base can beat him. Many brothers are particularly enthusiastic to him because of their admiration for him, but boss basically doesn't talk to them. Kay coughed and smiled awkwardly. "I wanted to go over and say hello. But after all, you are here, and I brought you here, so I can't leave you alone. Besides, even if I go over now, I'm afraid that boss will only give me a cold look. My skills and ability haven't reached the level where boss will take me seriously, and I really can't expect to be seen by boss, so it's meaningless to force my way over." Feng Ling glanced at Kay. "You are actually good at martial arts, but you still need time." Kay immediately glanced at her. "How old are you? Do you think I need time? What about you?" Feng Ling coldly smiled. 13 years old, but I lived in the jungle from the age of 1, fought with birds and beasts, and learned how to protect myself. When I was 5 years old, I began to learn how to shoot. Do you have to discuss age with me? Kay. He entered 11 Base at the age of 15, and had only received training for 3 years. No wonder the gap between them was so big. Not far away, when Nanheng got out of the car, the people around him were sensitive to the fact that the atmosphere around boss seemed to have reached a freezing point. Many people knew that although boss was the eldest son of the Li family, he didn't have much contact with his family. Recently, he suddenly returned to the Li family. No one knew why, and no one could guess. However, at this moment, looking at boss's expression, they knew that the atmosphere and temperature in the base would probably be low for a while. At this moment, the man who had just gotten out of the car caught a glimpse of 2 figures in the distance from the corner of his eye. When he saw Kay, his face was expressionless, but he suddenly paused for a second and looked over again. The man who looked like an emperor suddenly tilted his head, and a faint light flashed across his deep eyes. Everyone turned to look in that direction as well. "Boss, you!" The man raised his hand and motioned them to shut up. This gesture made the surrounding people quiet down in an instant. It should be known that boss would only say a few words to the people in the base when they were strengthening their training. Many newcomers and semi-newcomers, who were still in training, could rarely get boss's special attention. Even many senior members with outstanding military achievements might not have the opportunity to get too close to boss. Boss, who seemed indifferent to everything, seemed to be attracted at this moment. Who was that person? Of course, Kay and the others recognized him, but the boy behind Kay looked young. His short black hair was soft, and just reached the length of the back of his ears. Even when Li Nanheng's cold eyes met him, he was still lazy and indifferent, without any superfluous reaction. This boy's figure looked very familiar from a distance. Chapter 748. Even when the man approached, Feng Ling still stood still and didn't look away. But Kay was shocked that boss suddenly came over, and his attention seemed to be on Feng Ling. He immediately said with a flattered or conflicted expression, "Boss." Li Nanheng didn't respond. He just looked at Feng Ling, and his eyes darkened. His thin lips curved coldly, and he spat out a string of cold words. When did the base become a sightseeing place for strangers? Who are you? Do you know where this place is? Looking at the obvious inquiry in Li Nanheng's indifferent eyes, Feng Ling guessed that he should feel that her figure was familiar. But after all, he had never seen any part of her above the neck. Besides, she was wrapped in a chest cloth, and looked a little stronger. He must be just suspicious but not sure. But from his eyes, for the first time in her life, Feng Ling had a feeling that her hair stood on end. Even when she was surrounded by the police and faced with dozens of guns a year and a half ago, she didn't have such an inexplicable feeling of guilt. If it weren't for the fact that she was wearing clothes and the chest cloth, she would have suspected that the boss of 11 Base had recognized her at a glance. But when she thought about it carefully, she realized that they had only met once in the sauna room, and they had been fighting all the time. The steam in the sauna room was so misty that she couldn't even see his naked lower body through the mist. How could he see her clearly? Besides, it had been half a year. But this man's keenness did make her feel very dangerous. Feng Ling smiled coldly. It seems that next time I save people, I should be more careful, lest I accidentally save people of 11 Base, and be inexplicably labeled as tourists after being invited in. Hearing her words, Nanheng took a look at Kay next to him. Hearing her words, Nanheng took a look at Kay, who hurriedly nodded. Yes, boss, little brother Feng Ling saved my life. I was ambushed at the foot of Mount Viros, and almost died in those people's hands. Little brother Feng Ling saved my life. I saw that he was good at martial arts, and his age was just right for the new recruits in the base this year. Besides, he had nowhere to go, so I let him follow me back to the base. I wanted to tell the drill master about it, but I didn't expect that boss would suddenly. Kay saw that Nanheng's expression was so cold that it almost froze him to death. As he spoke, he didn't know what he had said wrong, but boss's expression was obviously not warm at all. Instead, it was so cold that it made people panic. 11 Base is famous. I'm really lucky to be able to stand here. She needed to find a way out for herself, but it could not be a dangerous way out. She also needed to find an opportunity. Nanheng looked at her with his deep eyes, and did not speak immediately. Feng Ling was not in a hurry. Standing in front of him, her posture was even more standard than those members who had been trained in the base for a year. After about a few seconds, the man finally said coldly, being able to fight doesn't mean that you have martial arts skills. And having martial arts skills doesn't mean that you can stay in 11 Base. Since you are the savior of the base members, I'll give you this opportunity. Wait for me at the training ground tonight. Let's talk if you can survive 3 moves from me. His commanding tone didn't have the slightest bit of warmth, it was cold. Feng Ling raised her eyebrows slightly, and did not say much, which meant that she accepted it. But Kay was as excited as if something was wrong. When Li Nanheng turned to leave expressionlessly, Feng Ling stood in the same place, and curved her thin lips arrogantly. As expected, he was suspicious of her. First, he wanted to test her martial arts skills, see her moves, and then what? She had heard from a few Chinese people in the mafia that since she planned to stay in 11 Base, she would take it one step at a time and try to stay as long as she could. The fact that she was a woman must continue to be covered up. Otherwise, there would be no woman left in this kind of place. Besides, the fact that she had seen Nanheng's naked body would probably be the reason for him to drive her out. In fact, she didn't see it clearly at that time. Feng Ling inexplicably felt that she had suffered a big loss. She didn't see anything clearly, and was still being chased. Wasn't she wronged? Kay found a temporary place for Feng Ling, which was the bed in his room. The bed was divided into upper and lower bunks, just like the normal training troops. The only difference was that many troops in China would have at least 8 people in a room. But here, there were only 2 people in a room at most. The lower bunk of Kay's room was sent out on a mission last month, and he was still in Africa. So Feng Ling could live here temporarily. It was getting dark. After answering the drill master's call, Kay walked out, leaving the room to Feng Ling alone. After making sure that he would not come back for the time being, Feng Ling locked the door, picked up the black combat suit that Kay had just given her, and went straight into the bathroom. It wouldn't be too late to take a shower before fighting. After taking a shower, Feng Ling changed into the black suit. Kay said that he had worn this combat suit when he first came to the base 3 years ago. At that time, he was only 15 years old, but boys at this age grew too fast. In less than half a year, this suit became too small, so now it didn't look very old, and was only a little bit bigger for her to wear. And this little bit bigger was great for Feng Ling. A slightly loose suit was suitable for hiding her figure. Before coming to 11 base, Kay gave her a sum of money to thank her, saying that her clothes were too old, and wanted her to buy a few sets of clothes to wear. But Feng Ling didn't buy them. Instead, she bought a few pieces of cloth suitable for wrapping breasts, and made them into more effective breast wrappings. Now she wrapped the breast wrappings around her body, which no longer felt stuffy and airless, and could be wrapped around a few more times to hide her figure better. On the other side, after returning to the base, Nan Hung had a simple meeting with several drill masters in the base, and then stood in front of the window on the second floor behind the base. The subordinate who had just come and stood behind him, not daring to speak or disturb Boss, but his eyes still couldn't help looking at him. He didn't know why Boss was even more depressed than usual after returning from the Lee family this time. Could it be that the elders of the Lee family had done something shocking to anger Boss again? Although Boss was a godlike existence in the base, after all, he was still a junior in the Lee family. The elders of their family had all led soldiers to fight in wars, and had great power in the military. But when they taught their children a lesson, they either swung a cane or directly whipped them with a belt. Tut tut, he didn't dare to imagine that scene. But what was going on with Boss today? Why did he keep looking in the direction of the training ground expressionlessly? Chapter 749. When it was getting dark, Nan Hung had already gone to the training ground alone. Probably because he had nowhere to vent his anger after coming back from the Lee family, he was worried that there was no one to beat, and probably wanted to see the true face of that boy. In short, in the eyes of many members of the base, Boss, who had never cared about anything, actually took the initiative to go to the training ground to test a newcomer. The point was that Boss was waiting for him. He's not here yet. Nan Hung glanced at Kay, who was passing by, and asked. Kay paused. He didn't expect that Boss would take the initiative to ask him. He immediately stopped and replied, I just went to the drill master's place to get something. Feng Ling probably took a bath and changed his clothes, because he was about to compete with you. Ha ha ha, life should have some sense of ceremony. I feel that he attaches great importance to you, but I think he should have finished packing up by now. However, no matter how Kay laughed, Feng Ling still didn't appear until the sky was completely dark. Nan Hung, who had waited on the training ground for more than half an hour, looked as cold as frost. The group of base members around couldn't help sighing in their hearts. He actually dared to let Boss Lee's brother go. Did he know how to write the word death? Although Nan Hung looked angry, he had nothing else to do tonight, so he was not in a hurry. He randomly picked a few members to fight, but after a few rounds, they all fell to the ground crying and begging for mercy. Usually, the drill master wouldn't beat these people too hard. After all, many of them had just joined the base and needed more actual combat training and basic training. It would take them at least 5 or 8 years to pass the training. But Nan Hung obviously didn't intend to show mercy. When these young members were called to the training ground, they knew this would happen, but they didn't expect that in the end. They really fell to the ground and couldn't get up. Looking at these useless newcomers, Nan Hung was expressionless and didn't fight anymore. He just glanced at the darkening sky. Boss, was he still going to wait for that boy so late at night? Who on earth was that boy? The group of people couldn't help looking at Kay. Kay was also dumbfounded. Finally, in the darkness of the night, a slender black figure came over under the cold moonlight. When she walked to the training ground, Feng Ling glanced at the newcomers who were scrambling to stand up on the ground, and then turned to look at the man who was surrounded by the words, not to be trifled with. After her shower, she had been waiting for her hair to dry. This place was full of men, and there was not even a hairdryer. Even if there was one, she did not know how to use it. After all, she had never used it before. At this moment, the wind blew through her soft black hair. Under the moonlight, the young man had a face that was difficult to distinguish between a man and a woman. Although the black uniform on her body was slightly loose, she was so handsome that many people couldn't help but point at her. She was only 13 years old, but she already had an indescribable allure and charm. Oh my God, I didn't take a good look at him in the afternoon. The boy you brought is quite handsome. Is he sure he's a man? Why is her skin so soft and tender? Don't tell me he's a girl? Hearing the word girl, Feng Ling looked directly at the person who spoke. Her expression remained unchanged, but the corners of her mouth curved charmingly and coldly. Girl, you're only 13 years old, and haven't even reached the age of puberty yet. Do you want to try my fist first? Hearing that he said he was 13 years old and directly provoked him, the other party, who had been here for 3 years like Kay, didn't believe that he couldn't beat such an untrained little boy, so he readily accepted the challenge. Nanheng didn't speak, and just let them fight. However, the man had just stepped onto the training ground. In the blink of an eye, before the group of people could see Feng Ling's movements clearly, the man was already lying on the ground, and his back was stepped on by Feng Ling. However, because it was just a casual kick, Feng Ling didn't hurt him. She just made the man hurt a little, withdrew her foot, took a step back, and said with clear eyes, "Do you want to continue fighting? You can't even beat a girl, okay?" The man's face turned livid with anger, but he was really convinced. After all, this boy's attack speed was so fast that it surprised him. He said a few words to resolve the embarrassment, and fled in the laughter of the group of brothers. Kay secretly gave her a thumbs up from below, and then he turned his head to the brothers beside him, and kept bragging about how Feng Ling saved him that day. The group of people were stunned and felt that this 13-year-old boy was almost deified, but just now, his attack speed was really amazing. Feng Ling's speed was an instinct that she had trained since she was a child in a wolf pack. This was indeed a speed that some people might not be able to achieve, even if they trained for decades. This was also the key to her unexpected victory, even though she hadn't received formal strict training. Nanheng just looked at her and didn't speak. When Feng Ling looked at him, under the cold moonlight, this was the first time that Feng Ling saw the man's face clearly since that time in the sauna room. Although she had seen his face at that time, it was still a bit blurred in the water vapor. And then she covered her face with a towel. The man in front of her had pitch-black eyes that were deep and bewitching. His handsome face was slightly more robust, but it just so happened that his facial features were just right. When he looked at her, his gaze was cold, as if he could penetrate her entire body in an instant. "You do have some skills." The man looked serious, and his tone was so flat that no one could hear his emotions. There was no smile on his cold face. Feng Ling glanced at him and smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "What? The legendary Boss Li has stage fright? Are you afraid of losing face in front of your group of men?" Hearing this, Nanheng's originally cold black eyes suddenly lit up with a frightening cold flame. The group of members around couldn't help holding their breath, and didn't dare to say a word. This boy was really King courageous. The group of members who had planned to go back to take a shower, and go to bed early, because they still had to get up early tomorrow morning, for training, didn't plan to leave. They wanted to stand here, and watch how he would die in the hands of Boss. Watching Boss Li being provoked by a brat was much more interesting than watching the other brothers fall into the mud again and again during training. However, just when everyone didn't know what Boss planned to say or do, Nanheng suddenly made a move. Feng Ling's reaction was also very fast. At the moment when he attacked, she dodged and responded with a move. However, Nanheng's speed from attacking her lower body to changing his target was so fast that even Feng Ling didn't expect it. His eyes suddenly changed, and when she realized it, the man's hand had already attacked her upper body and directly hit her chest. Chapter 750. Shit, what's Boss's move? Directly attacking her chest. I've never seen him make such a sinister move before. The voices around the training ground couldn't be heard by the two of them. Feng Ling's chest was heavily padded. She paused and couldn't help but step back several steps. But her expression didn't change at all, and she continued to fight back. After all, she hadn't received any strict and precise training. All her moves were based on instinct and some punches and kicks she learned from the mafia. She was fast, but in the face of Nanhang's very routine and occasionally changing fighting style, although she could withstand 3 or 4 moves, his moves became faster and faster, and then he hit her chest again and again. Although Feng Ling knew it, she still felt a little uneasy after being attacked. For a moment, she had to stagger back several steps. When she steadied herself, Nanheng looked at her with a much colder expression. It wasn't her. Although they looked similar, most of them were about the same height at the age of 13 or 14. After confirming that the boy in front of him was not the fearless girl in the orphanage a month ago, Nanheng no longer probed, but used all his strength, and didn't treat her as a newcomer at all. Feng Ling knew what he meant. After being hit a few times, she became smart and only defended. After all, her speed was still fast. If she kept dodging, Nanheng could only hit her shoulder in 10 moves. But if she wanted to hurt Nanheng with a counterattack, she might have to train for at least another 10 years. It was just a test, and it could be counted as half of the competition. Feng Ling knew what real strength was. She calmed herself down and accepted the challenge. In the end, Nanheng's fist almost landed on her face. Just as she was about to take the blow, a gust of cold wind swept past her eyes, and the man's hand stopped precisely an inch away from her face. She raised her eyes to look at him, and Nanheng also glanced at her coldly without expression. Obviously, he was a little disappointed with her skills, but at least compared with other newcomers, Feng Ling was much stronger. Nanheng withdrew his hand, turned around, and left without saying a word. The group of people who were carried down were about to clap and cheer for this exciting fight, but they were also afraid that their boss would sweep through them in a fit of rage. If that happened, they would all suffer a calamity. They resisted the urge to applaud, but when they saw their boss turn around and leave, the group of people stood on the spot, confused. They didn't know what their boss was planning. Was he going to keep this guy or not? Feng Ling stood on the training ground and raised her hand to press the slightly painful part of her chest. The reason it hurt was because Nanheng had hit her chest several times. Others might not have seen it, but she clearly knew that he was testing whether she was a woman or not. Fortunately, the breast wrapping cloth he was using now was stronger and thicker. She was only 13 years old. Even if her breasts were well developed, they were not fully developed yet. Being tightly wrapped by the breast wrapping cloth, he basically couldn't feel anything when he patted her. Compared with what he saw with his new eyes in the sauna room that day, it was certainly not the feeling he had imagined. Just this point alone was enough to dispel half of his suspicions about her. Boss! A man who was not afraid of death was too curious. He chased after Nanheng and asked, "That guy named Feng Ling, are we going to keep him or not? I think he is very arrogant at such a young age. Why don't we just keep him and let him hone himself in our base? I think in a few years, his edges and corners will be smoothed out." Li Nanheng didn't look back and said indifferently, "Since you like to hone yourself so much, let him stay. Throw him to the drill master of your Team 3, and let him hone himself." Throw him to their Team 3? That was to say, if that boy entered the training camp of their Team 3 in the future, the drill master would often ask Feng Ling to stand out and compete with them? Wasn't this just asking for trouble? That Feng Ling was just defeated by Boss Li. If it were all the newcomers in this base, who could be his opponent? Ahem, boss. The man followed up reluctantly and asked in a gossipy tone, "Why did you keep hitting that boy's chest? Could it be?" In the past, they often heard that Boss Li was not close to women. Even if the Li family arranged beautiful girls for him, he didn't even bother to look at them. Some people even suspected that Boss Li's sexual orientation was abnormal, and feared that he would lose his virginity in the base. Later, they found that they thought too much. Boss Li was probably not interested in men or women, because he really didn't want to be close to anyone. Nanheng glanced at him coldly and slowly said, "I'm not interested in men. If you say one more word, I'll run 50 laps around the base tomorrow. The man behind him instantly turned pale and ran away as if his feet were smeared with oil. The next day, in the breakfast cafeteria of 11 base, Nanheng, who rarely came to the base cafeteria to eat, rarely appeared in everyone's sight. However, the group of rookies and semi-rookies who had personally watched the exciting match last night still had shock in their eyes that they had not digested after the whole night. Someone still whispered, "Hey, do you think boss really likes men? Last night, boss really hit that kid's chest directly. It's obvious that he was taking advantage of him." Even if the whispers of the group of people were too low, Nanheng could still hear them. A drill master sitting opposite him didn't dare to say a word, but still glanced at him. Nanheng didn't respond. After eating, he threw the tableware heavily on the table and snorted coldly. Then he said coldly to the drill master of Team 3 sitting opposite him, "Kick the boy named Feng Ling, who was assigned to your team last night out of your team." The drill master of Team 3. He was just assigned to his team last night, and it had been less than 10 hours since then. How could he kick him out? Then he heard the expressionless Boss Lee said coldly, "Send him to my team. I'll deal with him myself." The drill master of Team 3 and the other drill masters. Feng Ling was taken to the base cafeteria by K early in the morning. Although 11 base was a training ground, it occupied a very large area. Even the so-called base cafeteria was larger than the general restaurants outside, and the dining facilities were also very good. Feng Ling had never experienced such treatment. As soon as she walked in with Kay, she saw Nanheng coming out with an unkind look. However, even though she saw him, Feng Ling was still hesitating whether she should greet Boss, but Boss Lee just coldly passed her by. Chapter 751. When Feng Ling learned that she was suddenly transferred from Team 3 to Team 1, and that the drill master of Team 1 was Li Nanheng himself, she remained expressionless. Kay said that those who could enter Team 1 were all rookies with excellent martial arts skills. Ordinary rookies couldn't enter Team 1 at all. Usually, whenever there was a mission, Team 1 would be the first to be selected, because Team 1 was the most skilled group in the entire base, and was the most admired training camp in the base. Because most of the members of Team 1 had grown up, even without Boss Lee's personal supervision, the members of Team 1 would train consciously every day, and Boss Lee didn't need to worry about them at all. Many people in 11 base had different opinions about Feng Ling's sudden transfer to Team 1. Some people thought that Feng Ling was lucky to be discovered by Boss with her little martial arts skills. She was able to sneak into Team 1 as soon as she entered the base, and get such a good opportunity. While some people thought that Boss was clearly making things difficult for her. The members of Team 1 were all like wolves and tigers. When they trained, they all worked hard. When they went out on missions, they dared to put their lives on the line. If such a 13-year-old boy was brought into Team 1, he would probably die in the training camp within half a month. However, in the face of all kinds of curiosity, comments, and concerns from this group of new people, Feng Ling didn't think much of it. Since she had decided to settle down in 11 base, it didn't matter where she lived. Anyway, as long as she could train, learn marksmanship, and all kinds of things she liked, as long as she had a place to live and food to eat, this was the life she wanted. On the first night after being transferred to Team 1, Feng Ling didn't have the consciousness to live there directly, and still slept in the lower bunk of Kay's room. Kay gave her an old cell phone that he had used before and said that in the future, as long as she had a chance to go on a mission in Team 1, she would get a lot of bonuses if she succeeded, so she didn't have to worry about buying new things. If it was a special big mission that might require her to risk her life, as long as she could complete the mission and come back alive, the bonus was enough for her to buy a small house in the suburbs of Los Angeles. It could be seen that although the members of 11 Base only wore ordinary uniforms, they were actually very rich and powerful. That night, Feng Ling fell asleep at Kay's place. It was rare for Nanheng to take a look at the training camp at night. The members of Team 1 were surprised that their boss actually had the time to come today. Usually, they trained by themselves, or the deputy drill master would do it for them. Their boss was always elusive, only appearing during the assessment, but tonight, He actually showed up. In the training camp, the man flickered the cigarette between his fingers. He glanced at the familiar faces in the crowd, and glanced at the person in charge of the training camp. He asked if the newcomer had come today, but the answer he got was that the newcomer would come tomorrow morning, and would not come tonight. Nan Hung threw the cigarette, but onto the ground, and stepped on it to extinguish it. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the people in the field, his gaze turning cold inch by inch. He was transferred to Team 1, an honor that all the members of the base dreamed of. But he didn't come in time? And he said he would come back tomorrow? Very good. It was probably because he was too good-tempered. It was rare for him to find a newcomer who could catch his eye, so he wanted to promote him. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being impolite. The next day. Why does Boss's face look worse today? Last night, the light in Boss's room seemed to be on. Did he not sleep last night? How could it be? Did Boss suffer from insomnia? Of course he suffered from insomnia. Nan Hung felt that it was probably because he had been with this group of men in the base for too long, that he was particularly sensitive to women. He had just seen them in the sauna room of the orphanage that night half a year ago, and they were a pair of little buns that had just developed. It was obviously a teenage girl who had broken in, but he still couldn't stop thinking about them. He didn't know whether it was because of the pair of little white buns that loomed beside the clothes that he had seen, or because he couldn't forget the guy who dared to burn the wires in the bushes, spend the night in the jungle, and dare to provoke him with signals. However, as soon as he closed his eyes and fell asleep at night, the scene he saw in the sauna room, when he tore off the other party's sleeves, jumped out in his mind. The key was that in the dream, the other party's face suddenly turned into Fong Ling's emotionless face from time to time. They looked quite compatible, both with the same soft and tender skin. It was because of this strange dream that their heads and bodies were put together that Nan Hung suddenly woke up and couldn't sleep all night. It was not until dawn that he barely slept for an hour. When he woke up in the morning, his face was as bad as if a can of Swedish herring had been splashed on his face, which was unbearable to look at. Nan Hung walked out of the training camp, wearing a tight-fitting black t-shirt under his black combat uniform. His neat short hair made him look arrogant and lazy in this casual and sleepy state. He was so cold and cool that it instantly silenced all the discussions around him, not daring to make any more rash comments. Boss, you didn't sleep well last night, did you? Han Jin, the deputy drill master of Team 1, followed behind and asked. Nan Hung didn't answer him but glanced coldly at the members of the training camp behind him, lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth, narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Is that boy here? You mean Fong Ling? He arrived an hour ago, and said he would arrive this morning. As expected, he was on time. In the morning, when we were just preparing for training, he came in. He just ran a few laps with everyone, and is now learning to do other training in the back." Han Jin answered truthfully. He was a man of his word. But damn, why did he dream of that brat in the middle of the night? Li Nanhing's face darkened. Although that boy named Fong Ling is young, he is a newcomer after all. I think his moves are ruthless and fast. Give him intensive training. If he can't keep up, let him practice overnight. If his movements are not up to standard, beat him with a stick. Don't consider whether he is a newcomer or not. Han Jin stood behind and thought for a while, saying silently, "It can be seen that he hasn't received professional training, but he is very quick-witted. With a little guidance, he can do very standard movements. He has only been here for an hour, but he has learned several good movements with good strength. I don't think we should use a stick to beat him for the time being." Nan Hung, with a cigarette in his mouth, suddenly turned to look at Han Jin, expressionless. As soon as he saw the fiery look in Boss's eyes, Han Jin instantly understood. Okay, I see. Give him the most intensive training. If he can't keep up, use a stick. If he doesn't cry for his mom and dad, you can revoke my title of deputy drill master at any time. Chapter 752. In the afternoon, Nan Hung inspected the training of several teams, and was about to go to Team 1. But he paused and looked down at his clothes. There were several good newcomers in other training camps who were splashed with some muddy water. but it had already dried up and was not obvious. Usually, everyone in the base was a man, and no one would be so clean that they would even care about this bit of muddy water. Even Nan Hung, who was a little obsessed with cleanliness, was gradually assimilated by this group of careless people. "Boss, there is only one team left in today's inspection. Aren't we going?" Xiao Su, who was following behind, was about to finish his service and would soon be assigned to work in the Los Angeles Police Department. He was agile and had always been valued by Nan Hung. He had been in the base for some years and did everything neatly. In the months before he was about to leave, in order to practice his ability, he often followed Nan Hung. Nan Hung didn't answer, but coldly glanced at his clothes again. Instead of going directly to the training camp of Team 1, he turned back to his residence. "Go get me a set of clothes. I'll go after I change." Xiao Su was a little stunned and didn't know how to react. No matter how much Boss liked to be clean, he wouldn't suddenly change clothes after walking around several training camps. What was going on? However, Xiao Su was a straightforward person. He didn't ask any superfluous questions, and directly went to bring Nan Hung's custom-made black combat uniform into his room. Nan Hung went back and took a simple shower. The tiredness from not sleeping well last night had been washed away. He casually combed his neat short black hair, took the clothes that Xiao Su handed over, glanced at them, and put them on. Xiao Su knew that Boss usually didn't like to wear suits. Instead, he liked to wear the same black uniform as everyone else. Other slightly more formal clothes would only be worn when leaving the base or returning to the Lee family, but Boss Lee would never be too stiff. Even if it was a suit worth millions of yuan, he could still look like a military ruffian. And this black uniform, even if it was the same clothes, standing in the crowd, the cold and cool man was an unforgettable scenery. This was said by Xiao Su's sister when she came here to visit 2 years ago. His sister accidentally saw Boss and began to miss him in her heart. Her mouth was full of all kinds of admiration for Boss Lee, and she couldn't suppress it even if she wanted to. The man buttoned up the buttons on his uniform one by one and said coldly, "Go to Team 1. Xiao Su paused for a moment. He remembered that Boss had purposely taken a bath and changed his clothes so that he could join Team 1 later. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. At the same time, the daily routine special training of Team 1, which began early in the morning, was almost over. Feng Ling was a newcomer and the youngest. She was not as tall as the men in the team who were already 1.8 or 1.9 meters tall, so she was arranged to be in the first row. Originally, many members of Team 1 were not too happy with this rookie who was too young. This was because no rookie had ever directly entered Team 1. They had to go through strict screening and competition before they could enter. They could be kicked to another team at any time to be retrained. But this kid had entered Team 1 as soon as he arrived. However, in this half a day of training, Feng Ling learned every training and competition very quickly, as long as he watched how others did it. A series of training tasks and movements were very standard. Even if he was not familiar with it the first time, he would be surprised when he did it the second time. It could be said that no one could find any fault with him. As a result, in these few hours, the unwillingness in most people's hearts gradually diminished. Besides, Feng Ling was young, thin, and didn't have a cheeky smile that was annoying. Most importantly, he was also good-looking. His soft and tender skin made people inexplicably want to protect him. In addition, he wasn't the kind of trash who was too weak to stay in Team 1. In just a few hours, he had gradually been accepted by the members of Team 1, and they had no intention of excluding him at all. This really put Deputy Drillmaster Han Jin in a difficult position. On the one hand, he had been trying to catch Feng Ling's weakness and punish him. Otherwise, he couldn't explain to Boss Lee. But this boy didn't make any mistakes at all. In front of so many members, he had to be clear about the reward and punishment, so he was very anxious. After a few hours, Feng Ling was accepted by everyone, but he was so angry that he got a big pimple on his chin. The day's training was almost over. At this time, most of the members were very excited and had planned their schedule in the base in the afternoon. Feng Ling was no exception. As soon as she entered the base, She changed her residence twice within 2 days. She also needed to make a good arrangement for her new residence in Team 1. The deputy drill master hadn't told her where she lived, so she had to interrogate him after a while. At the same time, at the passageway outside the training camp, a tall man in a black uniform strolled over. His cold and cool face was calm and indifferent. He stood at the entrance of the training camp like a ferocious tiger, looking at the group of members who were training. The man just stood there quietly, but his aura was enough to frighten people. The members who were a little slack because the training was coming to an end immediately stood as straight as a tree, and their expressions were very serious. But even so, Feng Ling was still not affected at all. She maintained the same action and expression from the beginning without any neglect, which was why the deputy drill master couldn't find any fault with her. This little boy was really too serious. 2 people behind Feng Ling moved their mouths slightly and whispered, "Boss Li usually doesn't see him even once in half a month. What's wrong with him today? He comes quite frequently. Is there any important task that he needs to tell us in advance? It's possible. Otherwise, boss usually doesn't come here." No matter how these people were curious and talking in their hearts, Li Nanheng still stood at the entrance of the training camp, looking calmly at them who were in the training ground. The man was tall and had long legs, a high nose bridge, and a cold and handsome face. If it weren't for the fact that his expression was so cold and indifferent, he could be described as a famous painting from ancient times. Xiao Su, who followed behind Li Nanheng, couldn't help glancing at the group of people, and then at the relatively thin Feng Ling, standing in the first row of the team. He thought that no matter how much boss cherished talents and took special care of members with potential, this Feng Ling shouldn't be so amazing that boss could change so inexplicably today. He was probably just thinking too much. Chapter 753. Li Nanheng looked at them until the training was over, and the team members were dismissed. The man's dark eyes swept across the crowd, and finally fixed on Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't seem to see him, and went straight to Han Jin. "Deputy Drill Master, where should I live in the future?" Han Jin paused, hesitated, and remembered that the base members of Team 1 usually lived in the buildings behind. He was about to make a phone call to ask which room had a bed, when he suddenly caught a glimpse of Li Nanheng coming over. "Boss!" Han Jin quickly turned to look at Li Nanheng. Nanheng didn't respond, but when he approached, he tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He put his hand casually in his trouser pocket and held the cigarette in his mouth. The smoke lingered in front of his cold face, and his neat black hair was a little messy due to the wind, which added a bit of wildness to him. His handsome profile was like that of the ancient Roman god of war in the oil paintings of ancient times. Seeing this, Han Jin and Xiao Su standing aside couldn't help secretly exclaiming that Boss Li was really a king seductive man. Fortunately, there were no women in this base, and even the cooks in the base cafeteria were all men. Otherwise, Boss Li would have been eaten by women sooner or later. "Deputy Drill Master, what's the matter?" Nanheng asked, obviously asking Feng Ling. Feng Ling just replied indifferently, "Well, I have something to do." Then she continued to ask Han Jin, "Where do I live?" Nanheng, who was completely ignored, quietly took the cigarette from his lips and glanced at him coldly. The young man was wearing a new black combat uniform. His androgynous face seemed to be glowing because of this suitable equipment, and he looked even more handsome, especially when the shadow of his ink-black hair fell on his eyes. It seemed to have a faint light that made one's imagination run wild. Realizing that he was so fascinated by this 13-year-old brat, Nanheng narrowed his eyes again, looked away, and glanced at the buildings not far away. "Han Jin, arrange a single room for him. He is young and looks much thinner than many members. If he lives in the dormitory, he will probably be eaten alive by those little brothers in a few days. Let him live alone, and let him adapt to life in the base for a while." Hearing this, Feng Ling turned to look at Nanheng seriously. "Thank you, boss." It was relatively convenient for her to live alone. Whether it was taking a bath or wrapping her chest every day, she could have her own space. She didn't need to avoid others, and she didn't need to be too careful to cover herself. Nanheng didn't respond, He flicked the cigarette but with his slender fingers, glanced at her clothes and black boots, and said coldly, 13 years old. You're not tall. After 5 years in the base, you probably won't even reach 7 meters. You're the first dwarf in 11 base so far. If it weren't for your speed and agility, I'm afraid you wouldn't be qualified to stand here. Hearing his words, Feng Ling couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. So in Boss Li's eyes, whether a person is good or not depends on their height. Nan Heng finally looked at her coldly, and there was a slight chill in his eyes. You're so small. What other advantages do you have except for your speed? If a strong man of 200 or 300 kilograms were to fight with you, I'm afraid you wouldn't even be able to withstand a shoulder throw. Speed and ruthlessness are just forms, and physical endurance is the most basic. You don't even have the basic physical fitness, and you want to establish a foothold in 11 base? I'm afraid you think too highly of yourself. Physical fitness. This was indeed Feng Ling's weakest point so far. Compared with girls, she was strong and powerful, but compared with boys of the same age, she was indeed much weaker. The basic gap between men and women was in strength and physical fitness. I'm just young. In 3 or 5 years, boss, just wait and see. Feng Ling smiled, but the smile in her eyes was obviously just an expression to express her desire to stay and didn't really reach her heart. Nan Heng looked at her indifferently and repeated indifferently, in 3 or 5 years, can you be 7 meters tall? Even if I'm not 7 meters tall, I can definitely lift you up, Boss Li. She leaned forward slightly and approached Nan Heng. Her starry eyes met his and she smiled. Or in 3 to 5 years, Boss Li, are you afraid that I'll throw you over my shoulder and lose face? Nan Heng's eyes were as bright as the stars in the night sky. She looked at him and smiled. Or in 3 to 5 years, Boss Li is afraid that I'll throw you over my shoulder and lose face? Nan Heng was expressionless. He looked at the boy's white and delicate skin, which was clearer than a woman's, watched the boy's face approach so wantonly, and breathed in the faint smell of bath milk on the boy's body, which inexplicably revealed a hint of sweetness in the fragrance. There was even a touch of powder on the boy's slightly curved lips. His thin lips, which had never been applied with any skincare products or cosmetics, had a natural clean color, and seemed to be silently seductive. Facing a mere 13-year-old boy, Nan Heng's clothes were cold and shabby, but his eyes glanced at Feng Ling's chest. Her chest was flat, and her figure looked stronger than he had imagined. She was completely different from the one in the sauna room. Damn it. It was okay for him to dream at night. Facing a teenage brat in broad daylight, he actually had the F***king desire to strip him naked and have a good look at him. In his heart, he was already suspecting whether it was really, because he lacked women, that he was inexplicably attracted to a child with soft skin and tender flesh. On the surface, Nan Heng was noble and indifferent, without the slightest extra expression. Only a trace of a smile appeared in his eyes, but it was a smile so cold that it was hard to see through. His black eyes were filled with warning. Want to throw me? Then I'm afraid you'll have to train hard 24 hours a day in the next 3 or 5 years. Don't slack off at all. Otherwise, if you can't even lift a finger of mine, I'm afraid you'll be laughed at by the brothers in the base for many years. Feng Ling noticed that he glanced at her chest. Her expression did not change. It was as though she had inadvertently patted her chest, as though she was casually patting the dust. However, as she continued to pat her chest, it allowed him to clearly see the flat expanse of her chest. She looked at Nan Heng's calm and indifferent eyes without the slightest fear. Then we'll see when the time comes. Her physical fitness was not up to standard now, but it didn't mean that she couldn't do it in the future. It was only interesting when there was a challenge. Feng Ling originally just wanted to find a suitable place for herself to survive. It was enough as long as she had food and shelter. Today, she suddenly had something she really wanted to do. For example, one day in the future, she would give Li Nanheng a shoulder throw and let him fall hard at her feet. Chapter 754. A month after Feng Ling officially joined 11 Base. Recently, Li Nanheng had been annoyed by a bunch of trivial matters of the Li family, After the men of the Li family turned 20, they would inevitably be taken away by their families to be married. He had struggled for half a year, but he was still disturbed by the young ladies of the aristocratic families arranged by his family. Apart from turning off his phone reasonably, in the base and cutting off all contacts with the outside world, as long as he stepped out of the gate of the base, he would definitely be entangled by all kinds of things arranged by his family, and all kinds of women. After another month in the base, he also turned off his private phone for a month, and the elders of the Li family directly came to him. At the same time, Nanheng was watching the members of Team 1 practice, shooting in the training ground behind. A group of team members stood in a standard horizontal row, and 5 people came forward to take guns. Nanheng leaned against a stone table not far away, playing with a gun in his hand, and looked indifferently at those people who were not familiar with shooting skills. After all, most of the people receiving training now were newbies. Among 100 people, there were at least 20 good shooters, but for Nanheng, it was still not enough. When Feng Ling and the others came forward together and picked up the gun, her movements were standard and neat. When the others were still adjusting their positions, Feng Ling had fired a shot forward without hesitation. With a bang, she hit the bullseye. Feng Ling had only been in the base for a month. During this month, Feng Ling did well in everything, but she should have just touched the shooting training. But her shooting skills were obviously not the skills of a newbie. Kay once said that Feng Ling's shooting skills were very good. When she saved Kay, she used his gun. Nanheng watched from a distance. The man in the black combat uniform looked cold and noble, leaning there without moving, completely like a boss, but with an aura that no one dared to approach. Then, he casually turned the gun in his hand in the palm of his hand. Without standing up or changing his movements, he directly fired a shot in the direction where Feng Ling had just hit the bull's eye more than 100 meters away. No one expected that a gunshot would suddenly come from behind. They were all shocked, but in the blink of an eye, they saw that the target 50 meters in front of Feng Ling was instantly shot through the middle, and Feng Ling's bullet was also shot down. Nanheng tossed the spear in his hand onto the stone table. His expression was indifferent, as if he hadn't fired the shot just now. He said indifferently, "Continue practicing." Hanjin, Xiaosu, Feng Ling, the members who were training. Boss directly shot Feng Ling's bullet down. Wasn't it obvious that he didn't care about Feng Ling's results at all? Now that they were told to continue practicing, Feng Ling was already looked down upon by Boss. If they continued to practice, wouldn't Boss throw up watching them? Fortunately, this Feng Ling was not a woman. Otherwise, he would really suspect whether Boss was actually interested in Feng Ling or not. But this boy was only 13 years old. Even if there might be something wrong with Boss's sexual orientation, he wouldn't go so far as to attack a child. Right? Feng Ling didn't think much of the suddenly hollow target in front of her. Everyone had 3 chances to shoot. As usual, she loaded the bullets and continued to shoot. The last 2 consecutive shots accurately hit the bull's eye, passed through the empty bull's eye, and landed on a tree trunk not far away, leaving a deep bullet mark. After finishing, Feng Ling neatly handed the gun to the next person and turned to return to the team. After shooting training, they temporarily rested for 10 minutes. Feng Ling turned to the outside of the training ground to pick up the half bottle of mineral water she had drunk. This position was very close to Nanheng's, but she didn't go over. She only saw that Nanheng was surrounded by several members, and many of them were asking him for advice on shooting skills. To put it bluntly, they were trying to curry favor with Boss. Feng Ling took another sip of water, screwed the mineral water bottle, and turned to leave. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of Fat Tai, who usually liked to fool around in Team 1, stretching out his leg to block her. Feng Ling only glanced at him indifferently. Not only was she not tripped, but she also raised her leg to counterattack. Fat Tai was secretly laughing, but unexpectedly, Feng Ling's leg had already greeted him. He felt a pain in his leg and jumped up from his seat. The next moment his buttocks were kicked again. Fat Tai clutched his buttocks in pain and began to howl. As he cried, he jumped to Nanheng's side and shouted, "Boss, quickly control this boy Feng Ling. He kicked my buttocks." Nan Heng glanced at Fat Tai, and then at Feng Ling, who was behind him. Feng Ling also rolled her eyes at Fat Tai. What was the use of asking Nan Heng to control her? Boss nominally led Team 1, but in fact, he didn't care about anything at all. He was completely a hands-off boss, and left everything to the deputy drill master Han Jin, who probably didn't care about it at all. Besides, why should he care about her? What relationship did she have with him? Did he need to care about her? Just as Feng Ling turned around and was about to put her mineral water aside, she suddenly heard the man's indifferent voice. Fat Tai likes to fool around. Do you really want to stoop to his level? If you kick him a few more times, he won't need to lose weight anymore. I'm afraid that he will be swollen for the rest of his life. Fat Tai. Boss, are you sure you care about Feng Ling? Aren't you openly and secretly insulting me? Feng Ling glanced at him and replied, and next time, I'll kick him in another place. I guarantee that next time he will be more evenly swollen. Fat Tai. Boss, help. There was a burst of laughter around. Nan Heng also snorted and raised his foot to kick away Fat Tai, who was about to pounce on him for help. How can you put on such a pitiful expression in front of me with your fat face? Hurry up and lose weight. If you can't lose 15 pounds in a month, get out of my sight and join another team. Fat Tai. Sob, I feel so wronged. Although I am fat, I am flexible. If I am not flexible enough, how can I have the ability to enter Team 1? Boss, you are discriminating against me. At this time, Han Jin walked over to Feng Ling, seeing her indifferent attitude, as if she still didn't like to blend in with the others. He said, have you learned how to shoot a long time ago? Your marksmanship is not bad. Are you interested in learning professional long-range sniping? Feng Ling glanced at Han Jin. I can shoot, but I haven't learned long-range sniping. Han Jin nodded. In this month, he really liked this child Feng Ling. Although she was a little young, she was really outstanding. Our base has been established for so many years, and there are less than 5 people who have reached the standard of long-range sniping, among which the best is Boss Lee. You'd better learn from them in the future, and try to get on good terms with Boss. Let him teach you. Chapter 755. Han Jin was startled and immediately laughed. You're really a clean stream in our base. Among these hundreds of people, I'm afraid only you, Feng Ling, dare to say in front of Boss that you don't like him. Boss's temper is a bit bad, but do you really hate him so openly? Han Jin paused and laughed. Nan Heng was about to pick up the gun on the stone table when his fingers paused. Fat Tai wanted to play coquettish with Boss again, but when he suddenly saw Boss's eyes turn cold, the fat all over his body trembled, and he subconsciously avoided to the side, not daring to come closer. Nan Heng's expression was very calm, and he glanced at Feng Ling lightly. Feng Ling didn't deny it or say much, but just turned away, not intending to take Han Jin's suggestion seriously. Han Jin's words were just a joke, but he didn't expect that Feng Ling was really cold. He turned his head and glanced at Boss. After all, the training of long-range snipers was recently mentioned by Boss at the base meeting, and he also mentioned Feng Ling's potential. If it weren't for Boss, Han Jin would never dare to make this decision. But now, had Feng Ling unknowingly rejected Boss? As if seeing the coldness in Boss's eyes, the air around the shooting training ground seemed to freeze, and the people around didn't dare to breathe. Boss, about the sniper. Han Jin hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still plucked up the courage to ask. Nan Heng played with the gun in his hand with one hand, and glanced at the direction in which Feng Ling left. Give him a chance to train his physical fitness for 2 years. If his physical fitness still doesn't meet the standard after 2 years, he will automatically give up the spot of long-range sniper training. There was no warmth in Nan Heng's voice. Li Nanheng told himself that Feng Ling was indeed very talented, had good marksmanship, and was at the right age to start training, so he temporarily gave up the spot. If it weren't for the fact that 11 base really needed this kind of talented newcomer, he would have kicked him out of the base. Although 11 base was under the jurisdiction of Li Nanheng, the Li family had a lot of things to deal with. He had been trained in 11 base since he was a child, and took over the base after he grew up. Now he had to go back to the Lee family to deal with some things. The base would be temporarily managed by the U.S. Police Headquarters and the Los Angeles Military Affairs Department for 2 years, as well as the people sent by the Lee family. In other words, in the next 2 years, Lee Nanheng would not appear in 11 base. Before leaving, Lee Nanheng invited the brothers in the base to a 7-star hotel in Los Angeles. This hotel was currently the most expensive and luxurious hotel in Los Angeles. It was resplendent and luxurious. Seeing that Lee Nanheng's car had arrived, the waiters came out to greet him in an orderly manner. Just as they walked into the hotel, the lobby manager suddenly caught sight of Feng Ling, glanced at her, and raised his eyebrows in surprise. This kid, wasn't he the guy who accidentally broke into their red wine cup tower 2 months ago? The lobby manager stared at Feng Ling for a few seconds, but Feng Ling walked straight in, as if she didn't know him. She was wearing the same black uniform as the people brought by Mr. Lee, and the people of 11 base were not to be trifled with. The lobby manager didn't know who she was and didn't dare to say anything, but he still glanced at Feng Ling from time to time. Nanheng walked in front, but it didn't mean that he didn't notice the change in the face of the lobby manager behind him. The tall man paused in his footsteps. His clear, black eyes swept over Feng Ling, who was being watched, and then he coldly glanced at the lobby manager. What? Do you know each other? The lobby manager hesitated for a moment. He felt that this Feng Ling looked much thinner than the others. He didn't know if he sneaked in, so he turned to Nanheng and said with a smile, "Mr. Lee, his name is Feng Ling, right?" Nanheng's cold expression didn't change. He glanced coldly at Feng Ling, who was still expressionless, and said indifferently, "What?" "A few months ago, he knocked down the red wine cup tower in the lobby of our hotel, and dozens of high-end crystal glasses were broken on the ground. Our boss saw that he was young and didn't have enough money to pay for it, so he asked him to work in the back kitchen of the hotel for a month to pay for the crystal glasses. But he only worked in the back kitchen for a week and then ran away. If he weren't young, we would have called the police. After all, the crystal glasses were worth a lot of money." Feng Ling knew what was waiting for her from the moment she walked into this hotel. She not only worked in the back kitchen for a week, but also broke a lot of high-end tableware in the back kitchen. Why did she leave? Of course, it was because the people in this hotel, from the waiters in the lobby to the apprentices in the back kitchen, were all snobbish. They thought that he was young and easy to bully, so they made trouble for him in every way. They even thought that he could be played like a monkey, because he was young. They touched her bottom line again and again. In the end, she kicked over the dishwasher in the back kitchen and left. Even 10 security guards in this kind of hotel couldn't beat her, so they couldn't stop her. After hearing the lobby manager's words, Nanheng turned to look at Feng Ling. "Is there such a thing?" Feng Ling said calmly, "Yes, after I earn money from a mission, I will immediately pay back the money for the glasses. I won't tarnish the reputation of the base." Nanheng remained calm, but the lobby manager said sarcastically, "Mr. Lee, I heard that the people selected by 11 base are not ordinary people. They won't take pity on such a little beggar, right?" "Why did they take him in?" 2 months ago, she passed by the glass window of our hotel and saw there was a leftover steak and pork bone rice inside. She was probably hungry and wanted to come in to take them away, but our hotel has its own rules, so we couldn't let her take them away. When she was chased out by our security guards, she beat them up with just a few moves and even knocked over the wine glass tower. Nanheng didn't speak at first, but his eyes were looking straight at Feng Ling, who had been standing there expressionlessly. When the lobby manager secretly laughed and thought that Mr. Lee would definitely drive this brat out, Nanheng first called his name. "Feng Ling," then he said, "besides steak and pork bone rice, what else do you want to eat?" The lobby manager's expression instantly changed. He turned his eyes to Feng Ling in disbelief. Feng Ling also raised her eyes to look at Nanheng, wondering why he didn't get angry. Obviously, she had embarrassed 11 base, hadn't she? As soon as she met the man's eyes, Feng Ling paused and said, "Those two look good, but I didn't eat them at that time. I don't know how they taste. Want to try them?" Feng Ling glanced at him again and then nodded. Nanheng coldly glanced at the dumbfounded lobby manager. Give him 5 steaks and 5 bowls of pork bone rice. If it's not enough, order more. Lobby manager. Dash. Chapter 756. Feng Ling. I can't eat so much. Nanheng glanced at her. Eat as much as you can. Look at how thin you are. You can't even eat a few servings of rice. How much room do you expect your physical strength to grow? Feng Ling. But he couldn't expect her to grow from a 13-year-old boy who weighed more than 80 kilograms to a fatty who weighed 180 kilograms. The lobby manager was surprised that Mr. Li took such good care of him. He didn't dare to speak anymore, and could only quickly turn around and ask the waiter to take these people in. At the same time, the lobby manager also smiled at Feng Ling. Young Master Feng. In addition to steak and pork bone rice, our hotel has other more high-end specialties, such as airship seafood or... Feng Ling's expression didn't change at all because of his deliberately exaggerated young Master Feng. She completely ignored him and turned to go upstairs with the team. The lobby manager stood there a little awkwardly and glared at Feng Ling's back. However, when he suddenly saw Nanheng's cold gaze, he immediately shrank his shoulders, shivered all over, and quickly put on an apologetic smile. When they reached the banquet hall upstairs, Feng Ling was about to walk in with Fat Tai and the others, when Han Jin suddenly patted her on the shoulder. Feng Ling, boss wants you to go over. Feng Ling looked back. Didn't I come here for dinner? Why did he call me? Han Jin spread his hands and shrugged, meaning that he didn't know. Feng Ling thought for 2 seconds, turned around and walked back. When she came to the marble escalator, she saw a tall man wearing the same black uniform as her playing with a silver high-end lighter. She glanced at his back and walked over. Boss. The man looked back at her. N. Just an N. Didn't he call her for anything else? Feng Ling was a little surprised, but since Nanheng didn't speak, she couldn't turn around and leave, so she took 2 steps closer and came to his side. Boss, what's up? The silver lighter made a crisp sound in the man's hand, and the man glanced at her indifferently. How much money do you owe here? Feng Ling raised her eyelids and looked at the lobby manager, who was busy greeting other members of 11 base on the first floor. The cups I broke are said to be crystal cups, and the cheapest one is at least more than 100 yuan. Plus the dishwasher and tableware I kicked over. I estimate that it's about 20,000 yuan. Nanheng pressed her head with one hand. Feng Ling paused because of his action and looked up at him. The man, who was much taller than her, lowered his dark eyes and lowered his head to approach her. His voice and breath were both very cold. You dare to sell yourself here for 20,000 yuan for a month? I didn't sell myself here, but I really don't have the money to pay them back. If it weren't for the fact that the people in the kitchen are so annoying, I would have worked here for a month before leaving. After all, I did make a mistake first. The man sneered and pressed his hand heavily on her head again. Feng Ling couldn't avoid him until the man had ravished her head enough and let go of her. He glanced at her messy and inexplicably sexy hairstyle and smiled coldly. You still know how to be moral. It seems that your nature is not bad. Feng Ling's face was cold. What made boss think that there's something wrong with my character? All right, go in and eat with them. Don't worry about the small problem of the hotel. I'll help you solve it. Hearing this, Feng Ling instinctively wanted to thank him, but the man continued. The condition is that you train your physical strength well from today onwards. 2 years later, when I return to the base, if you still can't hold a long-range sniper rifle firmly, you can get out of Team 1. Feng Ling originally wanted to thank him for helping her solve this problem. When she had money in the future, she would definitely return this 20,000 yuan to him. In the end, she swallowed the words back into her stomach and glanced at the man without saying anything. Forget it. Anyway, she didn't need to see him for at least the next 2 years. When 5 portions of steak and 5 portions of pork bone rice were delivered, the lobby manager directly asked someone to place them in front of Feng Ling one by one. The people at this table were all members of Team 1. Although they had heard the gist of it when they were downstairs, they didn't expect that boss really planned to let Feng Ling eat so much. who didn't know that Feng Ling ate the least among the brothers. Usually, everyone often advised him that it was the age of growth, and that he must eat more to be as tall as everyone else. Otherwise, if his physical strength couldn't meet the requirements, and he couldn't keep up with the height, Boss would definitely think of ways to bully him. But this much, the amount of rice was not small. How could she eat it all? Feng Ling was very calm. If he asked her to eat, she would eat. In the end, if she couldn't eat anymore, she wouldn't really be stuffed to death. In fact, her appetite was not small. However, compared with the group of big guys in the base who wolfed down their food, her usual appetite became poor cat food. Some people even said that she was like a little kitten. As long as she didn't stretch out her claws, she was very beautiful and cute. But once she got angry and stretched out her claws, no one could catch her. It really made people gnash their teeth with hatred. Today, for the first time, Li Nanheng sat at the same table with the members of Team 1. It should be known that Boss usually sat with the drill masters. After all, he didn't have anything in common with this group of people. But today, Boss actually sat here like this. He even sat down next to Feng Ling. Fatai silently whispered to Xiao Su next to him. "Boss, aren't you a bit too considerate of Feng Ling?" In fact, Fatai felt that his words should be heard by Boss, so there were some words that he didn't dare to say. What he wanted to say was whether there was really a problem with Boss's sexual orientation. Not only was there a problem, but he even didn't let go of a child. Was he planning to raise a handsome boy from a young age? Xiao Su said coldly. "If you were as capable as Feng Ling when you were 13 years old, Boss would also take care of you." Fatai. As a flexible fatty, he was actually despised again. Although Feng Ling learns everything quickly, and his shooting skills are also very accurate. After all, Boss is really too kind to him. If he asked us to eat together, we should eat together. But he specially ordered food for Feng Ling. Obviously, he is supporting Feng Ling. Also, Boss has never sat with us before. But now he directly sat next to Feng Ling. Chapter 757. Fatai had just finished muttering, and was about to take a sip of water, when he almost spat it out because of Nanheng's words. He coughed a few times until his fat face turned red. 10 portions? Even if he was fat, he couldn't eat so much. Fatai instantly understood the feeling of being specially taken care of by his boss. He silently smacked his lips, and this time, he didn't even dare to let out a fart. But in fact, the main problem didn't have much to do with the steak and pork bone rice, right? Wasn't the important thing that Boss was sitting next to Feng Ling? Feng Ling pushed the rice in front of her forward. "No, I can't eat it. Just give the extra 4 portions to Fatai." Fatai hurriedly shook his head and waved his hand, looking at Nanheng for help. Nanheng didn't look at him, nor did he allow her to give the rice away. He just said indifferently, "Whatever." After returning to the base in the evening, "You can do physical training for 5 hours. Just make sure you're full." 5 hours? Feng Ling's eyes flickered. Fatai and the others no longer envied Boss for taking care of him, but looked at him with sympathy. The physical training of 11 base was simply devil training, okay? 1 hour could take half of a person's life. 5 hours of physical training. Boss probably didn't intend to let Feng Ling see the sun when she was 14 years old. Feng Ling turned to look at the man beside her, who could almost decide her life and death with one sentence. Nanheng glanced at him meaningfully. He was casually wearing a black combat jacket and a black t-shirt, which clearly outlined the man's perfect figure. At such a close distance, the man's pure hormonal scent almost covered the excess air around Feng Ling. More importantly, the man's eyes were faintly dangerous, as if reminding her that even if he would leave 11 base for 2 years, he would not leave until the day after tomorrow, and at least he would torture her for 2 more nights. Just when Feng Ling pursed her lips speechlessly, the man suddenly threw a pair of chopsticks at her. "Eat. At least 2 bowls. Otherwise, I won't care if you collapse from hunger during the night training. You still have to continue training." Did he like torturing people so much? Or did he just find her an eyesore? Feng Ling picked up her chopsticks and began to eat. After eating a portion, she looked at the steak by the side and could not eat at all. At this time, Fatai suddenly interjected. Steak is a good thing to strengthen muscles. Little Feng Ling, look at yourself. Not only are you thin, you don't even have any muscles. Last time when we were training, your arms were exposed. They were white and slender like a little girl. Eat more, it's good for you. Feng Ling immediately raised her eyes and glared at Fatai. Fatai continued to gloat, but before he could finish, the waiter who had just left came back with 10 steaks and 10 pig bone rice. As soon as he saw the things they brought in, Fatai only took one glance and instantly let out a loud burp. His eyes immediately froze. Feng Ling cut the steak and slowly stuffed it into her mouth. She glanced at the dumbfounded Fatai with a hint of a smile and said, Hurry up and turn all the fat on your body into muscle. Eat more. It'll be good for you. Fatai. What the F***ck? If I eat all this, I'll die. He had only made a few sarcastic remarks about Feng Ling. But boss actually wanted to kill him in such a despicable way. They were all men. Why was there such a difference in treatment? At night, everyone returned to the base. It was rare that they didn't have to train at night. After eating and drinking their fill, everyone went back to take a shower and rest. However, Feng Ling was carried out of her residence by Nan Hung at 9 o'clock in the middle of the night, like a kitten, and directly brought to the training ground. Feng Ling ate 2 portions of rice and steak each and felt uncomfortable. Now that she was suddenly brought here, Feng Ling, who usually didn't like to show her emotions, had an obviously ugly expression on her face. Boss, my stomach is uncomfortable. Can't you let me lie down for a while? However, before she could finish speaking, Nan Hung forcefully pushed her over to the horizontal bar. Then, with an indifferent expression, he grabbed her collar and lifted her onto the horizontal bar. Feng Ling had to grab both sides of the bar to steady herself. At the same time, she looked at him with a strange expression. However, the man looked at her obviously uncomfortable appearance and did not have the slightest sympathy. Instead, he said disdainfully, Shouldn't you use exercise to speed up digestion if you feel uncomfortable? Go back to bed and lie down. Are you planning to vomit and defecate tomorrow morning because of indigestion? Is it that serious? It was good enough for Feng Ling to eat her fill since she was a child. Who knew that indigestion could happen? Nan Hung snorted. I gave you a chance to strengthen your physical training. Are you not going to appreciate it? Appreciate it? First, he deliberately made her look like this. Then he took her out and threw her onto the horizontal bar to force her to exercise to digest the food in her stomach. Anyone could appreciate it if they wanted, but she didn't. However, Feng Ling was still stared at by Nan Hung. She did 3 consecutive hours of physical training on the training ground. In the end, when she did 97 push-ups, she really couldn't get up. She lay on the ground powerlessly and became like a corpse, motionless. Nan Hung walked over and raised his foot to kick her leg. Continue, there are still 3 left. Boss, it's been 3 hours. Feng Ling lay on the ground motionlessly and closed her eyes to say, I owe you 3 today. Next time, I'll make up for 30. Hearing her words, the man sneered in a low voice and narrowed his eyes at her coldly. Didn't you vow to give me a shoulder throw? You can't even hold on for the last 3 push-ups. With your little ability, not to mention a shoulder throw, even if you really go out to do a mission in the future, you'll be defeated by your own physical strength before you meet the enemy. Feng Ling frowned. Even though the man's black leather boots were pressing on her back, she still gritted her teeth, and with her already weak body and the weight on her back, she raised her arms bit by bit. With sweat dripping from her forehead, she said in a low voice, 98. Nan Hung looked at her indifferently, his foot still on her back, until the kitten, who temporarily didn't even have the strength to stretch out her claws, counted to 100. He withdrew his foot, turned around, and pointed to the muscle training equipment not far away with his chin. Go up and stretch your limbs for half an hour. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.